You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
England are playing the Albanians, and Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, doesn't know who to support. You'll get it later. Alba, the new Alex Salmond party. What will it do to the Scottish parliamentary elections on May the 6th? What does it mean for the future of Scotland in the United Kingdom? And as we hurtle towards the end of the coronavirus lockdown, we'll be looking at what kind of travel plans you can afford to make. And looking at Priti Patel, pretty by name, pretty by nature, Britain's Home Secretary on the immigration issues. We'll be talking about that and much more in the next 3 hours. This is, of course, the mother of all talk shows. It is the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. That would be me, despite my lack of formal qualifications. Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, Rock and Roll Radio, with pictures coming up.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this, of course, is London, but coming to you all over the world thanks to the wonders of the internet and the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. If you're in Washington, D.C., you can listen in crystal clarity on FM 105.5 are the magic numbers there. You can listen on AM right across the United States, from burning city to burning city. You can listen all over the world on SputnikNews.com. But if you are one of the 500,000 people every single week now who watches as well as listens to the show, please listen to this. If you are watching on Facebook, please immediately share, and share again with all of your friends, all of your contacts on Facebook, because Big Algorithm is always out to get us. And so if you share, you will boost our audience, and we'd be very grateful if you would. You can watch on my own Facebook page, and you can watch on RT's multiple Facebook pages. Ditto on my own YouTube channel. Ditto RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, where again last week a record number of people did. You can watch on Instagram. We're back on Instagram. You can watch on Twitch. You can watch on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. Have I missed any of these platforms? They're multiplying at such a rate. Now, as I said, England were playing the Albanians, and it was a real dilemma for Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Normally, she'd be with anyone but England. That's the kind of knuckle-dragging mentality of Scottish nationalism. But supporting the Albanians would have been a stretch. Why do I say so? Because Albanians are coming for her. The new party, announced by my erstwhile parliamentary colleague Alex Salmond this week on Friday, the Alba party, has quite a few followers already, and they are dubbed the Albanians. And it's not an inapt appellation, because actually they're pursuing the Kosovo option. What could possibly go wrong? Alex Salmond is at least honest. He told us this day that if he can get the supermajority, they call it, on a minority of the vote, but a supermajority of the seats by gaming the system, then immediately the Scottish Government must negotiate independence from the rest of the United Kingdom. I'm not making that up. Yes, they plan a unilateral declaration of independence. Again, what could possibly go wrong? Well, actually, everything. They have no plans for another referendum, although referenda and other democratic tests may, said Salmond, play some part in the process, but the emphasis he laid was on great peaceful demonstrations of popular power in support of this unilateral declaration of independence. It would be, of course, entirely illegal. It could not be recognized internationally. Indeed, if Britain sought sanction against the UDI brigade, they would have to be granted by all fora, the European Union included, the United Nations, on which the United Kingdom has a permanent chair in the Security Council. All G7, everything, all countries would have to support the British government in those circumstances. And of course, Alex Salmond's big peaceful demonstrations would be met on the streets by peaceful demonstrations equally large, maybe more large than those demonstrating in favour of the illegal act of independence. I can hardly believe I'm saying these words, because that would be us off and running in the direction of Catalonia, at best, in the direction of Ulster, or even Yugoslavia at worst. And the British state would face the prospect of a failed state on its northern border, a failed state isolated and shunned, as it would have to be by the world, because nobody in the world can support illegal acts of secession for fear of those acts being repeated in their own country or in neighbouring countries, and an automatic security risk to the security of the United Kingdom would per se exist. Now, all of that sounds terribly apocalyptic, but in just 6 weeks' time, that's exactly where we might be. I don't have time or space to explain the DeHunt system of election for you, but in a nutshell, it could very well come to pass that the pro-independence forces got 45% of the vote, but 70% of the seats. If those who vote for the SNP, the ruling party in Scotland, give in sufficient numbers their second vote, their regional proportional list vote, to Alex Salmond's Alba party. Now, nothing is ever as good or as bad as it first appears. I learned that lesson a long, long time ago. And so Alex Salmond's launch, looking like Dracula from a very dark blue broom cupboard, whose video broke down without his knowledge after 10 seconds, leaving him standing there looking at the video that nobody else could see, and a series of defections from the SNP announced, with each one being, how shall I put it, hairier than the last. Tommy Sheridan, the latest, just as I came on air, being their latest recruit. But there are others about whom a great many question marks arise. So you could characterize it so far as the rough trade end of the SNP, but it might get smoother. They may have, despite all appearances to the contrary, an actual plan. We may see defections of greater merit in the hours, days, and, well, not many weeks ahead. We may. So we'll be asking tonight the doyen of political science in Britain, Professor Sir John Curtice of Strathclyde University, what are the different outcomes that may emerge from the launching of the Albanian option. It could be that the nationalist parties eat each other, and there are early signs that might well happen. Nicola Sturgeon's memory about Alex Salmond has suddenly flooded back. Just a week ago, in front of the parliamentary inquiry, she knew nothing, Gov. Never heard of any question mark against her former mentor, her predecessor, Alex Salmond. Now that she is under mortal electoral threat from him, she remembers everything. He's been a problem waiting to happen all along. A man not to be trusted with the ladies. In fact, as one wag put it, ALBA might well be an acronym for all ladies beware always. Something like that. Now, suddenly Sturgeon knows that what if this goes wrong? What if these two wings of the nationalist movement sufficiently tear lumps out of each other that the middle ground in Scotland gets the garlic out and says, no, a plague on both your houses. After all, you've been in power for 14 years and everything in Scotland is worse than it was before you came to power, by any metric. The schools' performance, the health service performance, the policing performance, the judicial system performance, the manufacturing performance, the jobs performance, the child poverty performance, the drugs death performance. Believe me, I could go on and on and on. By every metric, Scotland is worse today than it was when the separatists took it over 14 years ago. So that's one possible outcome. A second possible outcome is what Salmond says he wants. That the SNP win overwhelmingly the lion's share of constituency members of the Scottish Parliament, and Alex Salmond wins a very decent share of the list votes, the second vote in the proportional representation section of the ballot, giving what Salmond calls a supermajority, which he has said will be the starting pistol. And I hope I'm using the word pistol only metaphorically for a series of UDI actions, illegal actions for independence. That is also one possible outcome. A third outcome, and we'll be discussing with Professor Curtice, is that so discredited will the election results be by this transparent gaming of the political system, two parties, a facsimile of each other, although the ALBA one having rather more smudges and blobs of ink, if you get my drift, that Boris Johnson says these elections are farcical. And the political system in Scotland has clearly broken down. And therefore, not only are you not getting a second referendum, there will have to be elements of direct rule from Westminster reintroduced on things like the electoral system, on things like the auditing of the books. All of that's coming up over the next 3 hours. Professor Sir John Curtice will have crunched the numbers, and if he's listening to me now, he'll have some idea of the kind of questions I am going to ask him. And we've got a poll running now. Will Alex Salmond hold the balance of power after the May election in the Scottish Parliament? A, yes. B, no. C, plague on both houses. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. But that's not the only subject, of course, we'll be discussing tonight. Priti Patel, Priti by name, Sometimes not so pretty by nature is Britain's Home Secretary, the very first Home Secretary of Asian origin that Britain has ever had. But she doesn't exactly roll out the welcoming mat for immigrants like her and her family. She has a set of new immigration proposals that we'll be discussing with former Conservative MP Keith Best. Keith Best was once a coming man in the Conservative Party, but since leaving Parliament has devoted himself to the race relations industry and the whole issue of immigration and its fairness or otherwise. We'll be talking to him second in the show this evening. We'll be talking to Francesca Nand, who is a travel expert and a very fine woman who runs a blog that I myself have appeared on and which is pretty much the most popular travel blog in the land. Because, of course, summer is coming. Might even be here tomorrow if the weather forecasts are right. And with summer come itchy feet. People will be looking to travel. I know I will. I'll definitely be looking to travel. But can I? To where can I travel? What happens when I get there? What happens when I get back? Because all kinds of places are still in a third wave of the coronavirus. And we'll be talking, as always, to Moats medic, doctor, physician, surgeon, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, about the progress of the vaccination rollout, the deadliness or otherwise that faces us from Europe. Boris Johnson said today that a third wave that is raging in Europe might well cross the channel 3 weeks from now. If it does, will our vaccinations be enough to save us? Dr. Brar knows. The doctor will see you in the third hour. So get voting on my poll. Will Alex Salmond hold the balance of power after the May election in the Scottish Parliament? A, yes. B, no. C, a plague on both their houses. That's me. How about you? I'll be right back.
Radio Sputnik.
Oh, Jack lover, could you do us a favour? Could you give that shih tzu in there a trimmer? Carrie's brought it in, it needs a rate mop cut off.
Now then, little Boris, who's ready for the haircut?
What the?
Hello there, woof.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Will Alex Salmond hold the balance of power after the May election? A, yes, 22%. No, 35%. C, plague on both their houses, 43%. Get voting. Now, if one man in the whole country knows better than my next guest, Professor Sir John Curtice, I'm a Dutchman. He is the doyen of political scientists, the psephologist supreme. Strathclyde University is his bailiwick, but the world is his oyster. Professor Sir John, thank you for joining us again this evening. Let's start with Alba, if we can. Everyone's saying now, John, that, well, they knew this was coming. It was the most predictable event that could be imagined, but I didn't predict it, and I get the impression from the rather headless chicken way that the SNP leaders at first reacted, that they weren't expecting it either. What about you?
Well, we certainly knew that there would be an attempt to run a party list with a view to trying to persuade people to vote for the SNP for this party on the list vote instead of voting for the SNP for reasons we can go into if you want in a moment. Dave Thompson, the former SNP MSP, set that party up back in the autumn. Indeed, it was all ready to fight the election under, if I remember rightly, the banner of Alliance for Independence. So the stratagem that Alex Salmond has decided to lead was a stratagem that was widely known. There had been some suggestions for quite a while that maybe Mr. Salmond would join Mr. Thompson's setup, but in the end, he's not decided to do. He's decided to strike on his own. So the fact that something like this was going on within the nationalist movement was pretty widely known. But you're right, we certainly didn't know whether or not Mr. Salmond would be the person who'd end up leading it.
Now, I laid out three possible, there may be more than three possible outcomes from this. One, that the two wings or two cheeks of the same backside, as some of us would have it, of the nationalist movement will eat each other, damage their cause, and therefore both fail. A second is that a super majority of MSPs is obtained, albeit on a very much lower share of the vote. And a third is that the whole affair so discredits the process that it ends up strengthening Boris Johnson's refusal to grant a second referendum. These were the three I canvassed. You may have others, Professor.
Well, the three you suggest are certainly important, and they're all three possible outcomes of this process. I would simply add a fourth, because I think this then takes us to the heart of the debate that's been going inside the nationalist movement, at least so far as the tactics for the election is concerned, which is that Mr. Salmond might fail to pick up very much. He doesn't add or create a supermajority, but along the way, he does just well enough to deny the SNP the chances of being able to get an overall majority on their own. Because although Mr. Salmond is right, and it's, the heart of all of this, you have to understand a little bit about the Scottish electoral system. We have an electoral system in Scotland whereby 73 MSPs are elected directly in the constituencies, but then there are another 56 which are elected from party lists in each of 8 regions. But these list MSPs are allocated via a proportional representation formula such that the total number of MSPs, both constituency and list, is as proportionate as possible to the outcome on the list vote. Now, what this could mean, and it certainly this is what happened to the SNP back in 2016 at the last election, it can mean that if you do really, really well in the constituencies, you end up with so many constituency MSPs that the proportional calculation says, you've already got your just deserts, maybe indeed you've got more than your just deserts proportionally, therefore you're not going to get more list MSPs, even though you may be way, way ahead on the list vote. And that therefore the argument has been within the nationalist movement that in order to overcome this, we should game the system by creating a separate party and running it only on the list, persuading people to vote for the SNP on the constituency, but for this other party on the list. And that indeed, that's exactly what Alexander is trying to do. Nothing new by this, by the way. There were a lot of suggestions back in the days when the Labour Party dominated Scottish politics that perhaps the Co-op Party should be used in order to create a separate list party. This is basically trying to game the system. Now, although the SNP, for the most part, doesn't seem to rely on list MSPs, and given where the polls are at the moment, are unlikely to pick up very much in the way of list MSPs, the polls are just at that point where the SNP might still pick up 2 or 3 list MSPs, most obviously in the south of Scotland or in the Highlands, and those 2 or 3 could just be critical to the SNP getting an overall majority. So here we come into an argument about which is going to matter more to Boris Johnson, assuming either of them transpires. Is Boris Johnson going to be more likely to feel that he needs to give way when there is a supermajority achieved by gaming the electoral system even though that supermajority consists of MSPs from what in this instance would be three parties, the SNP, the Greens and Haluba, or would he be more concerned about the SNP having an overall majority on their own, in which instance then the precedent of 2011 might be regarded as somewhat pressing for the Unionists, because in 2011 the SNP got an overall majority, and in the wake of that David Cameron then paved the way for the 2014 referendum. So it depends on which you think is the more important objective to be achieved so far as the nationalist movement is concerned. But I mean, that said, of course, that's the narrow calculation. You're right, the big calculation is what does all of this do for support for independence in the first place. Now, one direction I could say to look, well, actually, support for independence is about 50%. It's been pretty solidly there for quite a while now. And about 87% of the people who are in favour of independence are currently minded to vote for the SNP. That looks like something that's not necessarily going to be unstudied by a spat between Miss Sturgeon and Mr. Salmon. But there's no guarantee of that. And undoubtedly, the crucial advantage that the nationalist movement have had hitherto in Scotland is that it was effectively united. The SNP basically was the only party, for the most part, representing nationalism in Scotland, albeit with a bit of an appendage for the Greens. In contrast, the Unionists are seriously divided. We saw this again in the last 24 hours. Douglas Ross, the Scottish Conservative leader, putting out a call to Labour and Liberal Democrats, let's get together, suggesting perhaps that indeed they should be trying to game the system by colluding and coming to some form of electoral power. Well, that got rebuffed pretty quickly. And the Unionists are divided. They don't agree about what their tactics should be, etc., etc. So what we've now got on the nationalist movement, in a sense, is now that unity is at risk of being fractured, and there's a disagreement about the tactics. So to that extent, at least, Alex Salmond's challenge certainly takes away one of the strategic advantages, or at least puts at risk one of the strategic advantages that the nationalists currently have north of the border.
Just to illustrate one of your earlier points there, in 2003, in central Scotland, Labour got 106,000 votes on the regional list and gained 0 seats because they had done so well in the constituencies. Whereas the Old Age Pensioners Party got a seat with 17,000 votes. And the Scottish Socialist Party, with Alba's newest recruit, Tommy Sheridan, got a seat on 19,000. This makes the point, doesn't it, about the danger of voting both votes SNP, both votes Tory, both votes Labour.
Oh yeah, I mean there is no doubt that that's precisely the scenario that Alex Salmond is pointing to, and that indeed, if given nowadays the Conservatives and Labour Party are primarily dependent on list seats, then if Alex Salmond were to succeed in securing representation, he would probably gain more of those seats at the expense of the opposition parties than you would the SNP. Though in truth, what you're doing when you're doing this, you have to guess which party is going to be the party that would otherwise get the 7th seat that you might otherwise pick up. And that can often be very difficult to calculate. And the point I just come back to, yes, in 6 of the regions at the moment in Scotland, the calculation that Mr. Salmond is making is quite pressing. But there are 2 other regions where it doesn't. There are 2 regions where the SNP might well need, the list vote might well make a difference. And to that extent, at least, I guess if Mr. Salmond were really trying to game the system to the maximum advantage of the nationalist movement as a whole, perhaps he might stand in 6 of the 8 regions, but not stand in the 2 where the SNP have a chance. However, maybe what's going on here, and you've alluded to this in your various alternatives, maybe what's going on here is that, of course, Mr. Salmond doesn't necessarily want the SNP to get an overall majority, because, of course, if the SNP gets an overall majority, then it will be able to determine what tactics it deploys vis-a-vis the UK government, what it tries to do if the UK government says no to referendum, etc. It will not have to accommodate the Greens and or Mr. Salmond. perhaps Mr. Salmond actually really wants to be in a situation which he says, the kingmaker, i.e. somebody to whom Ms. Sturgeon has to look for support in order to be able to pursue a nationalist strategy. Now, that's up to Mr. Salmond to deny or otherwise whether or not that's the case, but perhaps at least you can see why maybe that's one of the reasons why the SNP are not very keen on his stratagem.
The Green Party, what I call the SNP's gardening section, clinging to the SNP like moss on a dike, they are in a way the first losers from Alex Salmond's move, aren't they? Because they only get the 5 seats they have in Holyrood because SNP supporters in the first vote give them votes in the second. And Salmond is likely to outgun them, don't you think?
Well, yes and no, George. I think the honest truth is that there's a bit of a two-way traffic here, i.e. that some of the people who would vote for the Greens if the Greens were to stand in their constituency vote for the SNP because they can't vote for the Greens. So the truth is, I think the SNP gets boosted in the constituencies by the Greens not standing where they don't, and they did fight 3 constituencies last time. And yes, the Greens do profit from the fact that some people vote strategically for them. That said, however, one interesting piece of analysis that's going to actually come out on my website tomorrow does point out that the kind of people who are most likely to say that they think favourably about Mr. Salmond, and the truth is that's very much a minority of voters in Scotland, those voters tend to be at the more socially conservative end of the Nationalist Coalition. They're disproportionately people who voted Leave in the 2016 referendum. And these are not the kind of people who, for the most part, are inclined to vote for the relatively socially progressive Greens. So you might well find that actually the people who are willing to vote for Mr. Salmond on the list vote are not necessarily the same people who are willing to vote tactically for the Greens.
Lastly, and I'm grateful for your time, I said earlier that Salmond so far has picked up the kind of rougher trade, the rough trade end of the nationalist movement. You may or may not agree with that characterization, but how do you characterize the kind of people who've gone over to Salmond, and what kind of level of defection do you expect?
Well, I think that the truth is what we're looking at are people, for the most part, who've been pretty well associated with Alex Salmond for a while. And their views and their previous positioning reflects the division that there has been within the SNP for some weeks or months. There are essentially 2 crucial issues. The first is, do you trust Ms. Sturgeon to pursue holding another referendum with the zeal and the ardour and the resilience that you think is necessary? These are people who were rather disenchanted by the fact that back in March 2017, Ms. Sturgeon called for another referendum, got the Scottish Parliament to vote for one, but then in the wake of the outcome of the 2017 UK general election, when the SNP lost seats, then marched troops back down again. These are people who think that at the end of the day, Ms. Sturgeon is more interested in remaining First Minister of Scotland than she is at pursuing independence. So they're impatient with her. The second issue that divides most of these people are that they are the people who are concerned about the Scottish Government's proposals whereby trans people, particularly trans women, are able to reassign their agenda on the basis of their identity. They don't require anything in the way of medical evidence, if you think that's relevant at all, for the fact that they've changed their gender. These are people who think that this perhaps is a step too far and is in particular putting at risk the rights that have been gained by some women. So those are the 2 crucial true divisions. And these also seem to be people who perhaps do not necessarily feel that re-entering the European Union is necessarily quite as important for an independent Scotland as certainly the SNP thinks. So these are the fault lines. These are fault lines that have been nagging away at the SNP for quite a while. What Mr. Salmond has done is to bring this out in the open. What is less clear is just how many people are actually willing to defect to the party to do this. He's obviously going to pick up some. I suspect, however, for the most part, this is a relatively minority group within the SNP, or at least minority group so far as willing actually to defect. And certainly when you look at SNP voters, only about 16% think favourably of Mr. Salmond. Over 90% of them think favourably of Ms. Sturgeon.
Forgive me, I said last, but if you will, answer me this one. Why would a nationalist populist party like the SNP go off at that tangent that you have just ably described? For example, their lists have to be topped by an ethnic minority or a disabled person. The gender recognition thing that you talked about, the hate crime bill and so on. These seem to cut across the, you might say, tunnel vision that a nationalist populist coalition ought normally, or would be expected normally to be pursuing.
Well, yes, but I think, this is a reminder to us, George, that the SNP has always been a broad church when it comes to anything other than independence. There are people in the party who are on the centre-right, who probably would be in the Conservatives, but for their belief in independence, and there are those who regard themselves as Social Democrats. Equally, there are plenty of social liberals, but there are also some social conservatives. And certainly when it comes to Brexit, for example, there has always been a body of SNP support that has felt that what's the point of liberating ourselves from London only to put ourselves in chains from Brussels? What we've seen with the SNP in government is that set of issues, it's Brexit, it is trans rights, indeed it is aspects of the hate crime bill that you mentioned that begins to fracture the coalition, because when it comes to these kinds of issues, the fact that you are in favour of independence doesn't necessarily mean to say that you agree with the stance that's been taken by the SNP government on these other issues.
Professor Sir John Curtice, as always, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Will Alex Salmond hold the balance of power? Yes, 21%. No, 34%. Or a plague on both their houses, 45%. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Let's take a call. Before the break, Jared is in Pennsylvania, but wants to talk about Scotland. Wow, Jared, go ahead.
Yes, hello, Tom. Tom. Yes, hello, George. I want to talk about Scotland. So this recent talk about independence is a bit interesting case, because in America, we've also had a long history of successionist movements and independence movements. We know quite a bit about the American Civil War, but what most people don't also know is that we had states like Rhode Island that almost completely seceded from America during the War of 1812 against Britain. We have large independence movements in Oregon and Washington, and we have Hawaii and California and Texas as well. But the thing about Scottish independence that I don't seem to really get is you're on a big island, and basically they want to rebuild Hadrian's Wall almost. You know about Hadrian's Wall, and they're building it from the other side this time. Instead of it being built from Rome, this time it's being built from Edinburgh. And it seems to be a divide and conquer tactic almost. You know, like divide up these big states into smaller states. We see this in the Soviet Union. We see this in Yugoslavia. The U.S. deep state is trying to do that in China with Xinjiang and Tibet and Hong Kong. You know, all these Chinese states they're trying to break away from. So it really doesn't make any sense other than if you wanted... I see the hand of the European Union in all this.
Well, me too. Me too. And bravo, Jared. I couldn't put that better myself, and I won't try to. But there is no doubt at all in my mind that the hand of the European Union, and it's a historic relationship between the Scottish nationalists and the Germans. The founders of the SNP were collaborators with the Germans, the Nazis, in 1934. Indeed, their main leader, was interned during the war, collaborating with Germany against Britain. Now, of course, Germany in 2021 is not the Germany of 1934, and the SNP of 2021 is not the SNP of 1934. But there is no doubt at all in my mind that the European Union would like to punish Britain for Brexiting. And there are many people in the British political system and in the media, perhaps especially in the media, that hate Brexit so much, hate Boris Johnson for Brexit so much, that they will, even subconsciously, if not consciously, they will agony and punishment on our country because we deserve it for having decided to leave the European Union. My position is very clear and always has been all of my life. I'm against the breakup of countries and the idea of partitioning a small island of English-speaking people, especially given the economic situation, which I shall adumbrate later, courtesy of a good friend of mine in the business community in Scotland. When you take it into account, it's actually an act of political suicide. But I've got to take a 60-second break. Count them.
Radio Sputnik.
Hello, listeners and viewers of the mother of all talk shows. This is the real George Galloway, and most definitely not an AI deep beak. Now, just like our segment, This is the Week, let me begin with things I'd never say. Here's a cracker. I read the Daily Mail every single morning over my breakfast. The crosswords are indeed my favourite. I was never a member of Parliament. In fact, I've never even voted. I don't like wearing hats. I'm more of a headband kind of man. Don't believe me? Look at how I push my glasses on my face as I make a point. How I use my hands to emphasize it further, and you know I'm really angry when I go quiet. I'll continue. Nicola Sturgeon is my favourite member of the Crankies, and I'm most definitely not a deep fake. You get me?
This version of George Galloway is the property of France 2 and was not meant for broadcast. Je suis désolé.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
He's clever, that Simon, I must say. He is very, very clever. The poll, 700 people have voted. Salmond, will he hold the balance of power? Yes, 19. No, 33. And a plague on both their houses, 48%. You can vote until the final hour, actually, when we'll have a second poll on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, countries that refuse to take back migrants may lose visas under Priti Patel's new plan. Britain could block visas from countries that refuse to take back failed asylum seekers and criminals in a tit-for-tat plan laid out yesterday by the British Home Secretary, Priti Patel. The proposal is among a range of levers the government is considering to increase the number of illegal migrants sent back. It was included in a document published by the Home Secretary that outlined an overhaul of asylum rules. Patel said the changes were needed to fix a system that was collapsing under the pressure of illegal routes. Fresh figures revealed that the cost of the asylum system to taxpayers had risen to more than £1.3 billion because of backlogs caused by legal challenges. One of the men undoubtedly behind many of these challenges is the former Conservative Member of Parliament, the redoubtable Keith Best, who is the former Chief Executive of the Immigration Advisory Service, who joins me now. Keith, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. Let's talk about the tit for tat first. How seemly did that seem to you?
Well, it's not exactly very prudent to do this at the time we're just having a massive spat with the rest of the EU as well. And I think it's going to go down like a lead balloon. I mean, the idea that we would impose extra visa controls on French citizens if we found asylum seekers coming through France, and bearing in mind that we can't actually return them to France now, because since leaving the EU, we are no longer subject to the Dublin III Treaty, which enables us to return asylum seekers who could have claimed asylum in another safe country. So we've lost that as a result of Brexit, unless we're going to have a lot of bilateral treaty agreements with all these countries through which asylum seekers travel, that they will accept out of the goodness of their heart refused asylum seekers that we choose to send back to them, then we're not going to get anywhere. And can you seriously see any European country right now saying, oh, we'll help you, Britain, don't worry, yes, we'll take back any number of people you want to send back to us? Apart from anything else, of course, there's the age-old problem that we've always had, that many asylum seekers, and it's not because they've destroyed them themselves, many of them don't have documents. So actually you can't prove where they've come from, you can't prove which country they're a national of, and it becomes very, very difficult.
Well, they're not going to agree, these European countries, for the reason you said, but another reason. These migrants want to come here, to Britain. They don't want to be in France. Why is that?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to look at the widespread use of the English as a second language. So, I mean, if you don't speak a word of French or German, but you have a smattering of English, why would you want to go to France or Germany, where you've got a whole new cultural learning curve to get hold of? The other thing is, and I'm very proud of this, and I don't think we should see it as a demerit, Britain still has the reputation abroad of being a fair country where we have the rule of law, where even ministers of the Crown can appear before the courts and be chastised by them and told that they're acting illegally. That doesn't happen in very many countries around the world.
Unlike Germany and France, we've got the rule of law and we're fair.
Well, they have the rule of law, but frankly, I can tell you from the decades that I've been involved in this business, going to France and saying that actually the French authorities have a fair asylum system is really stretching credibility quite a long way. I mean, my experience has been that the French police find people in one department and take them straight to the border with the next department and say, you claim asylum over there, not here, mate, we don't want you. And the fact that, you know, for years and years, the French police in Calais have been raiding what was then the jungle, or now the camp where many asylum seekers assemble. They give them a one-way ticket to Paris, hoping they'll get rid of them. And then after a while, of course, they all filter back again. France is not an exemplar of the way to deal with asylum cases.
So what can we do, Keith? £1.3 billion is a lot of taxpayers' money. There do seem to be boats arriving unmolested by the French on a daily basis. What should be done?
Well, what should be done is what we've always called to be done right through the days of the Labour government, with a faster, firmer, fairer policy, which is not dissimilar from what's being said now by the Home Secretary. The trouble is, these are aspirations. Most of it is in cloud cuckoo land. They can't achieve it, and history shows that. What we should be doing is speeding up the asylum process, putting enough investment. As Caroline Noakes, the former immigration minister, said only recently, we need to invest in the system to make sure that we deal with asylum claims rapidly, as quickly as we can, determine whether somebody really is a genuine refugee under the 1951 Convention terms of definition of a refugee or not, and if they are, to give them settled status, which they're entitled to. We are a signatory to that convention. They're entitled to that. If they're not, we've then got to try to find ways of getting them back either to the country of origin or to another country. I don't pretend that is easy for the reasons you and I have just mentioned. Why would a country, for example, say that they will take back people if we can't even prove they're their nationals? I mean, can you imagine the Indian government saying to Britain, we've got a few people here who claim to be Indian. We'd like to send them back to you. Thank you very much. The Indian government would turn around straight away and say, first of all, you prove they're our nationals. We don't know about them.
Yeah, I mean, you posit a possible alternative, but when examined, even by yourself, it isn't an alternative. So what you're really saying is, let's ascertain who's entitled to it and give it to them more quickly, and let's hold on to those that aren't entitled to it, because we're not going to be able to send them anywhere anyhow.
No, what we've got to do with the ones who fail to satisfy the test as to whether they're genuine refugees or not is to have a pan-European and, frankly, a global understanding about sending people elsewhere. It's no good pretending, as the Home Secretary is, we can dump them all on the Isle of Man or the Isle of Jersey or something like that. I mean, they're not going to live with that kind of solution. We've got to do this through international cooperation. And I'm afraid at the moment, Britain's stock in international cooperation with the rest of the countries of Europe is frankly not very high.
Didn't Priti Patel suggest the Scottish Islands as a destination? Caused a great deal of horror in Scottish Tory circles. I think she suggested Orkney or Shetland and the Hebrides.
Well, we've probably all got our favourite islands we can suggest as to where they should go, but frankly, it's not a solution. They would still be within the British domain, and clearly, what every Home Secretary, whatever political colour they may wear, every Home Secretary has said is that those who are not entitled to remain in this country should not be here. That's a perfectly understandable and legitimate position to take. They shouldn't be here. But once they've got here, trying to get rid of them is a very different situation. I mean, years and years ago, George, I was involved with the Vietnamese refugees. I went out to Hong Kong. I saw the camps there. I mean, at the end of the day, after the rest of the countries had taken their pick of all the Chinese nationals and the entrepreneurs and everything like that, the Hong Kong government was left with the basic ethnic Vietnamese whom nobody wanted, and they had to ultimately assimilate them into their society because no other country would take them. Now, the only way you're going to deal with that is to actually have a proper pan-European agreement. And frankly, although I'm very pro-European, I acknowledge right at the outset that Europe has failed miserably in having a comprehensive common asylum system. It's all been NIMBYism. Not in my backyard, thank you very much. Let's push them somewhere else. That is not the way to deal with human beings, and it's certainly not the way to deal with international diplomacy and politics.
Keith Best, thank you very much indeed. You look like you're well suntanned. I hope you're resting up somewhere very nice. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Will Alex Salmond hold the balance of power after the May election? Yes, 19, it's falling. No, 33, also falling. and a plague on both their houses, up 3 at 48%. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, in the second hour, we're going to be talking to Lisa Francesca Nand, who is a travel journalist and host of the Big Travel podcast on the coronavirus impact on the travel industry and travel this summer. But let's squeeze a call in before the news. It's Michelle in Slough on the immigration issue. Michelle, welcome.
Hello, George. How are you this evening?
I'm the better for hearing your dulcet tones. Welcome back. Go ahead.
Okay, many years ago, I used to work for Pitman's Training, and I think it was 2001, when the government cancelled something called individual learning accounts. Now, these individual learning accounts meant that everybody in the UK had what I think was around £300 that they could use for things like IT training. Now, Pitman's, as you know, have been going a very long time, and we were relying on people's individual learning accounts to provide teacher-led training. We and our franchise was completely and utterly killed off when they brought in Learn Direct, individual. This was the Blair government.
I remember it well. I was there.
Right. Well, you know what happened? They cancelled every person in the UK's individual learning accounts, possibilities to retrain in IT with real teachers, and then they replaced it with English as a second language and this massive online training thing called Learn Direct that was a complete and utter failure. But that was £300 of training funds out of the pockets of every single person in the UK.
Yeah, it's been mishandled for a very long time, hasn't it? It's nothing to do with race, because, of course, there are very substantial numbers of people legally here, and they've had children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren from other races, and have contributed mightily, magnificently to the patchwork that is the United Kingdom. But every country needs immigration controls. Only Trotskyites and liberals favour a world with no immigration controls. And so we now are in the business of giving people points, the so-called Australian points-based system, so we can choose the immigrants, like Keith Best was talking about with the Chinese entrepreneurs from Vietnam, choose the immigrants that are best placed to contribute well to our economic development for the benefit of everybody. But the vast majority, I say this as someone who sat in surgeries as a member of Parliament for almost 30 years, the vast majority of asylum seekers do not qualify under the asylum conventions. They are not specifically, personally, at risk or fear of persecution. They are effectively economic refugees, though many of them are fleeing from wars that we and other countries visited upon them and their countries. And I don't put them in second place because of that. My own grandparents came here as economic refugees, so I'm the last person to diss an economic refugee, and who knows, God forbid, I might end up an economic refugee somewhere, sometime, someplace myself. But we oughtn't to confuse that with asylum policy, Michelle, should we?
Absolutely not. But, I mean, one of the things that we're talking about here is we are actually not looking at the economic backgrounds of these people that are coming into England to learn English, basically, to our expense, and then One of the reports that I actually read on was that people were crossing Europe, coming here, using EASL funding to learn English, with the objective of actually getting into America.
Oh dear. All right, Michelle.
I mean, I don't know, it was just a report that I read that at the time I found quite shocking.
Good luck trying to get into America. Joe Biden's deporting people from America even faster than Donald Trump did. Michelle in Slough, thanks for that wonderful call. Here's the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The British government remains confident everyone in the UK will get a second dose of the COVID vaccine within 12 weeks of their first, the Culture Secretary has said. Questioned about the concerns over vaccine supply, Oliver Dowden said, "We always knew there would be ups and downs," adding that the timetable was on track. He said it was essential to provide second doses and it would not require mixing vaccines. Dowden added that the Moderna jab was due to arrive in the UK in April. It's the third vaccine of 7 that the UK has put in an order for, and the country is lined up to receive 17 million doses. So far, more than 30 million UK adults have received their first coronavirus vaccine from either the Pfizer or the Oxford jabs, and more than 3 million of them have had a second. But vaccine supply issues have continued to make the rollout bumpy. Earlier this month, the NHS warned of a significant reduction in jabs available in England in April, and there has been a delay to Oxford AstraZeneca's shipments from India. There are also tensions from the EU over the supply of jabs. Lorry drivers, cabin crew, prison escorts and seasonal workers entering England from outside the UK will need to take a COVID-19 test within 48 hours of arrival, the government has said. Those remaining in the UK for longer than 2 days will be required to take a further test every 3 days. The new regime is intended to stop the virus spreading and new variants entering. The new rules take effect from the 6th of April. MP Neil Hanvey has become the second one to defect from the SNP to join Alex Salmond's new pro-Scottish independence party, ALBA. The MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath said that ALBA provided, quote, a tonic for our movement. On Saturday, former Justice Secretary Kenny McCaskill announced he would also stand as a candidate for ALBA. Alex Salmond launched the party on Friday with the aim of building, quote, a supermajority for independence at Holyrood after the election in May. Suez Canal salvage teams are alternating between dredging and tugging as they continue to try to dislodge the massive container ship blocking the busy waterway. Dredgers have so far shifted 27,000 cubic metres of sand to a depth of 18 metres, with work set to continue around the clock. The 400-metre long Ever Given became jammed diagonally across a southern section of the canal in high winds more than 5 days ago, halting shipping traffic in one of the world's busiest waterways. As of yesterday, 321 boats were waiting to get through the canal, including dozens of container ships, bulk carriers and oil tankers. Airstrikes that sent villagers fleeing into the jungle show the situation in Myanmar is much worse, a humanitarian worker has said, as military leaders reportedly partied on the deadliest day of violence since last month's coup. More gunfire has been reported today as people gathered for the funeral of one of at least 114 people said to have been killed by security forces yesterday, including a 5-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl. Local media is reporting that around 3,000 people from Myanmar's southeastern Karen state have left the country and crossed the border into Thailand to escape the violence. Despite the bloodshed, protesters returned to the streets today to demand a return to democracy. David Eubank, founder of the humanitarian group Free Burma Rangers, said airstrikes on a village in Karen killed at least 3 people and wounded 8 others. He said the first airstrike struck around 8:30 p.m. local time on Saturday, and more hit between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. today. 2 top UN officials condemned Myanmar's military junta today in a joint statement. Today, Alice Wairimu-Nderitu, UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and Michelle Bachelet, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, urged the Myanmar military to immediately stop killing the very people it has a duty to serve and protect. A suspected suicide bomb attack outside a Catholic church in the Indonesian city of Makassar has left 14 people wounded, police say. An explosion erupted as 2 attackers tried to enter the church on Palm Sunday, the first day of Easter. A destroyed motorbike and body parts were found at the scene, and police said the 2 attackers had died. Militant Islamists have attacked churches in the past, but no group has yet said it was behind the bombing. Indonesia's president, Joko Widodo, condemned the act as a terror attack. Facebook has frozen Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's page after he claimed without evidence that a herbal remedy could cure COVID-19. He said in January that a thyme herb solution could cure the disease. He will be unable to post for 30 days. The company said the leader has repeatedly violated its policies on coronavirus disinformation. Maduro is not the only world leader to face a ban from social media companies over COVID. US President Donald Trump and Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro have also faced action over COVID posts. And finally, a 6-year-old boy has found a fossil dating back millions of years in his garden after receiving a fossil hunting kit for Christmas. Siddhak Singh Jamat, known as Sid, said he was excited to find the fossil in his garden in Walsall after digging for worms. His father Vish Singh was able to identify the horned coral through a fossil group he is a member of on Facebook. The group identified the find as most likely a rugosa coral, estimated to be between 251 and 488 million years old. Singh Sr. said, quote, the period that they existed was from between 500 million and 251 million years ago, the Paleozoic era. England at the time was part of Pangaea, a landmass of continents. England was all underwater as well. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Vote now on my Twitter feed. Will Alex Salmond hold the balance of power in Scotland after the May election? Yes, no, or a plague on both their houses. We'll be taking calls after my next guest, and so get your calls in now. If you're in the UK, it's 02077 982 255, and in the US 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway, at RTUK News. Mandy says, George, how do you feel about vaccine passports? We'll discuss that maybe in the third hour, Mandy. And in response to the poll, Karen says, I really hope to God not. Even more frightening is Tommy Sheridan has joined the Alba gang. I fear dark times ahead for Scotland. Well, it might get them the swing vote, if you get my drift. Ivan says Sturgeon and Salmond should meet on Rannoch Moor with their best claymores. Fight to the death. I'd buy a ticket to watch. And Derek says, I'm sure Moore will jump ship after the election and Sturgeon will be on the outside looking in. And Martin says, independence is an irrelevant distraction from Scottish institutional favour. So get your votes in on the polls, get your calls in. Lisa Francesca Nand is not just a travel journalist. She's not any travel journalist. She's the doyenne of travel journalists and host of the Big Travel podcast, on which I have appeared myself. And she joins us now to discuss travel in the age of the coronavirus. You're looking wonderful. It's great to see you again. Lisa, tell us in a nutshell, are any of us going to be taking a holiday abroad this summer? If so, where? And what will the consequences be?
It's a guess at the moment, if I'm honest. I like to come on here and pretend I know everything, but it is an absolute guess because things are so changeable. The government this week have been talking about the traffic light system, where you've had green countries that will be no restrictions, maybe a requirement to take a test, amber countries that will be open with quarantine, and red countries which will just be no-go or a hotel quarantine, as we've got with the red list at the moment. But, you know, we did travel last year. We travelled last year. The travel corridors were a little bit of a mess, admittedly. People were stuck in other countries and wanted to get back, and hearing there'd be a quarantine and rushing to get back. But last year we didn't have the vaccine and we did travel. So I am very, very hopeful that this year we will travel. I think it very much depends on your personal risk-taking ability. You know, can you afford to spend a few grand on a holiday at the risk that you might not be able to take that holiday, that you might not get that money back for months and months? Can you personally afford to take the risk that when you get back, you'll have to possibly quarantine for 10 days, therefore taking 10 days off school or 10 days off work? It all depends on very personal reasons. But, you know, George, there's so many people that want to travel at the moment. And there's a lot of people that say it's a global pandemic, we shouldn't be traveling. But there's so many people that have had a really, really tough year, and they think travel is part of what I do. It's my holiday. I need to go away and relax. And I don't think we should holiday shame them. And also, we live in such an international community that there's also people trying to get back to places they love, people they love, people that are trying to get into this country as well. You know, we talk about holidays and people can be a bit flippant about it, but travel is about so much more than holidays for many people too.
Yes, absolutely. There are couples separated, families separated. There are people like myself with property overseas that I haven't seen for more than a year. I hope it's still standing. There are all kinds of reasons to travel, but the most important one for me is to sit on a deck chair in the sun. I'm wondering, you see, I've had the vaccination. Therefore, if the vaccination works, that means nobody can give it to me. Doesn't mean I can't give it to them, but it means they can't give it to me. Why is it so difficult to get a reciprocal agreement with countries like Spain, like Portugal?
I think that the vaccine, what you're kind of referring to there is a vaccine passport, and it's controversial because the people who haven't had the vaccine, if there is some sort of reciprocal agreement, would not be able to travel. Although the EU met last week to try and discuss what would happen with a potential vaccine passport, and they did say that actually they're going to hopefully have a digital certificate, a digital health certificate, which will either prove you've had the vaccine or prove you've had a negative test. So it's not going to be just exclusive to people who have the vaccine, which is a good thing. Although there are private companies already, Saga and some of the airlines have said, Saga Cruises, P&O Cruises, and some of the airlines have said, you know, and it's their prerogative as well to say that actually we will only be accepting vaccinated people, which does seem a little bit unfair because I'm unable to have the vaccine at the moment due to my age. I'm too young, finally, for something. But, you know, there will be cases where countries will accept us based on the negative test as well. And interestingly, you've got this dual thing going on. You've got the EU meeting to sort of, you know, do something together. And also individual countries are coming out. Greece has said they'll accept people that have been vaccinated. Spain have said something similar. Turkey have said something similar as well from the middle of May. The thing is that the UK, they're not letting us go now. You know, the countries are saying, please come in, we need your money. And now our government has said, actually, you can't travel. It's now illegal to go abroad on holiday and you'd be charged £5,000. What we're hoping for is by the 12th of April, we'll have some news on this. But, you know, as these things go, we'll probably get some news leaked before, but who knows? But that's what we're looking at the moment, I think. The people who really want to travel will go. We'll probably have a traffic light system, and we probably will have some sort of vaccine passport. So you'll be all right, George. So that's okay for you.
I'm so old, I'm all right. I've got the vaccination. But you mentioned cruises there, Lisa. Aren't cruises done for after all the outbreaks on board ships and so on? It's hard to see how cruises make a comeback. I wouldn't get on a big ship with hundreds of people and be trapped, as it were, on it, with the risk of substantial outbreak of the virus.
Yeah, I do really see where you're coming from with that. But people who love cruises really love cruises. And there'll be people who are absolutely desperate to get on cruises right now. And they are, traditionally the older generation, and they will have had the vaccine. So I think you and I might not necessarily be interested in a cruise, but there are people who are desperate to get on a cruise. And we've said this before with cruises, haven't we? People call them giant floating Petri dishes because there's been issues with the norovirus and other illnesses even before the COVID situation. But I think, if we can travel this year, I think there will be a lot of people interested in cruises. If we can't travel this year, I think we're in grave danger of not just cruise companies, but massive companies, airlines, and people that provide hundreds of thousands of jobs. You think of the travel industry. I think we're in grave danger of them going bust. So I really do hope from a financial point of view, as well as, I want to get us on holiday as much as the next person. I think that from a financial point of view, we really need to start travel, not just about us going away, which is lovely, but about people coming into this country. And that's something we forget when we talk about travel during the coronavirus, is that we need people in this country. We need people on the airlines, in the hotels, at the tiny little tea rooms and restaurants and the museums and the art galleries and the fish and chip places. We need people to come here too.
Quite so. On that, staying at home, staycation, I saw an item today that you can't buy a camper van at the moment in Britain for love nor money because the demand for them has gone through the roof as people calculate that they may well be staycationing. To what extent does our holiday infrastructure in Britain, in the coastal communities, for example, in the Highlands, in the Lake District, to what extent can it cope with a massive increase in staycations?
I don't necessarily think there will be. There is obviously an increase in staycations, but without the people coming into this country, I think that will cancel each other out. But in terms of people who want to get a holiday in the UK, it's actually really difficult. I've been trying to book something and it's actually really difficult. And also, I love the UK. All the places you mentioned are absolutely beautiful, stunning, probably some of the best places in the world if you could guarantee the weather. But they're also really, really expensive. For normal families, it's a lot cheaper to go to Turkey or Greece or the Costa del Sol. It's a lot cheaper to buy a glass of wine or an ice cream or the hotel or anything else when you're there. So actually, for a lot of for a lot of normal families, holidaying in this country is actually out of reach. And you're right, staycations have been booked and booked and booked, and actually it's not easy for people to actually book something. So if you can't go abroad and you can't go here, it looks like you're not having a holiday at all. Even the campsites are booked up, and it's not very easy to go wild camping too. So it is a great shame for a lot of people that want to go traveling, and that's another big reason. I'm not just saying this because I am part of the travel industry and I'm desperate to go away myself, but that's another big reason we need to get travel moving.
And lastly, what has it meant how do you be a travel writer when there ain't no travel? You are as I say, the doyen of this business, but is anyone still paying attention, and is there anything still to write and talk about?
Well, I'm really lucky in the way that travel news is travel news. So I've actually been really busy. I class myself as Simon Calder's unofficial understudy. Obviously, I don't know as much as him. He's, he is the god. But no, you're right. Nobody is going anywhere. And I've been reporting on the travel. I've been busier than ever. But the Big Travel Podcast, which of course you have been on and you've been a wonderful guest, is about interviewing people through their lives through travel. So it hasn't really affected me personally. But for me personally, like many people, I'm desperate to get back abroad, and you've got family abroad the same as I have. I grew up in Spain. My parents are on the Costa del Sol, or my best friends there. My best friends are having a birthday party this week that I should be at. And for many people who have property abroad, there's many people who do that and who have friends and family. I think that is the real thing. It's heart-wrenching to be separated from them. I'm not taking away from also, George, it's heart-wrenching for people who are separated from their friends and family within the country. I realise that. And I think, we need to get things moving. We need to do it safely, obviously. I'm no anti-vaxxer or COVID denier. We need to do it safely, but we need to do it. We need to get back human contact and social interaction, whether that's within this country or abroad as well.
Lisa Nand, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. That's Lisa Francesca Nand, travel journalist and podcaster. Let me take another of those 60-second breaks. You can count them.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, this is where I look back at what was in the news and making the headlines over these 7 days of our checkered history. This is the week. On this day in 1939, the Spanish Civil War ended when Madrid fell to the fascists, headed by General Francisco Franco. And on the same day, 40 years later, in 1979, radioactive steam leaked into the atmosphere in Pennsylvania, USA. It happened when a water pump broke down at 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, 10 miles southeast of the state capital, Harrisburg. The accident was caused by a combination of human error and equipment failure, and the plant was partially shut down. 3 Mile Island remains the largest nuclear incident in US history, apart from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course. In 1971, US Army Lieutenant William Calley was found guilty in a court-martial of the My Lai massacre, where 500 South Vietnamese villagers, men, women, and children, who looked much like my own children, were murdered by soldiers under his command. His sentence, of course, was condign, 3 years of house arrest. And in 1971, Charles Manson and 3 members of his hippie cult were sentenced to death in Los Angeles. They were found guilty of the August 1969 murders of 7 people and 1 unborn child at the beginning of the year. Their victims included 8 months pregnant actress Sharon Tate, wife of the film director Roman Polanski. The California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in 1972, and the 4 were given life sentences instead. Spinning back more than a century from that, in 1867, the United States bought Alaska from Russia for just over $7 million, working out at roughly 2 cents an acre, the worst land deal any Russian ever made. And the film Chariots of Fire, directed by Hugh Hudson and starring Ben Cross and Ian Charleson, premiered in 1982. It was a winner. A year before, in 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded in Washington by John Hinckley. Afterwards, he's said to have commented to his good wife Nancy, "Shucks, I forgot to duck." Security at the British Parliament was virtually non-existent in 1979, at the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, when Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, the Conservative grandee Éire Niamh, was killed by a car bomb as he drove out of the House of Commons car park. I must have driven out that car park 1,000 times, maybe more, and every time I did, I wondered if my car was going to meet the same fate that his did. It was a tilt mechanism bomb, and as he mounted the slope, it triggered the explosion. This was also the week in 1951 that the Rosenbergs, an American electrical engineer, and his wife were found guilty by New York's federal court of passing atomic secrets to the USSR. Julius Rosenberg, aged just 33, and his 35-year-old wife Ethel were accused of stealing technical information from the Atomic Research Center in Los Alamos and turning it over to the KGB. The Rosenbergs were sentenced to death, but unlike the family and the Charles Manson group, their death sentence, despite numerous appeals for clemency, was executed. They were killed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison on the 19th of June, 1953, leaving 2 small children as orphans. They were the only people in the United States ever executed for Cold War espionage, and their conviction fueled US Senator Joe McCarthy's anti-communist crusade against un-American activities by US citizens. And I certainly can't forget this one.
This, the most sensational result in British by-election history, bar none, represents the Bradford Spring. This is an uprising amongst thousands of people, many of them young people never involved in the political process before, who have demonstrated in this mammoth majority, this mammoth vote, a total rejection of the 3 major parties on the British political scene. I care nothing for the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats. I wish them political perdition. But I do care about the Labour Party, in which I served for 37 years, for 18 of which as a Labour Member of Parliament.
Well, now, of course, I care nothing about any of the 3 of them, but I certainly can't forget that night. It was on the 29th of March in 2012 that I won the Bradford West parliamentary seat from Labour by an astonishing margin of 10,140 votes. I said then that it was the most sensational victory in by-election history, and indeed it was. It was a total rejection of the big 3 political parties. It was a swing almost unprecedented and absolutely unprecedented for a left-wing alternative to the 3 major parties. It was an astonishing week because 2 days later, still wearing that crumpled coat because I didn't have time to go back to London and pick up a better one, I was at the altar with my good wife, Gayatri. 2 days later, we got married, me still in my campaign clothes. In 1920, the British Parliament accepted Irish Home Rule. A civil war in Ireland followed. Harold Wilson's Labour Party in 1966 won a landslide victory in the general election. The party had a majority of 96 seats and did so little of note with that gigantic, almost unprecedented Labour majority that just 4 years later, in 1970, they fell from office and power landed in the lap of Edward Heath, which wasn't all that comfortable place to be. Labour lost popularity when it devalued the pound in November 1967. Plans for trade union reform had to be shelved, and France vetoed Britain's second application for membership of the common market. Last week, the Seattle Sounders professional football team, or soccer as they like to call it across the pond, unveiled a second shirt commemorating Jimi Hendrix, complete with purple haze and Jimmy's signature on it. This was the week in 1967 that he first set fire to his guitar at a London gig. Difficult, odd segue that, but people may have thought it was an April Fool's joke when on April the 1st in 1978, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs founded Apple Computer in the garage of Jobs' parents' house in Cupertino, California. It is now the largest company in the world. But is it? Is it larger? I ask my clever friends through the glass. Is it larger than Amazon? If someone could check that for me. Anyway, who could forget, certainly not me, that it was in 2017 that Bob Dylan received his Nobel Prize for Literature at a private ceremony in Stockholm. Well deserved, long overdue. Bob Dylan is the greatest writer in the English language since William Shakespeare. Discuss. In 2001, former Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic was arrested and taken to prison, ending a heavily armed standoff at his Belgrade villa. After US pressure, Milosevic was extradited to The Hague to face an international criminal tribunal. He died in his cell at the UN tribunal in March 2006 of a heart attack. And in 1982, several thousand Argentine troops seized the Falklands from Britain. It was, of course, to lead to the Falklands War and Britain's recapturing of the islands, the 2,300 people, and the millions of sheep thereon. And finally, I read during the week that the band Fleetwood Mac, you probably didn't know they were still on the go, are to embark on another tour, and they want everyone who was ever in the band to take part in it. I counted 20 until I ran out of fingers and toes, and that doesn't, of course, include the founder, the late and great Peter Green. It'll have to be a double-decker tour bus. But it was in this week in 1977 that their album Rumours went to #1 and stayed there for 31 weeks. It was so good, one got bored of it. It was on so much. That's it then. Another turbulent 7 days, and that was the week. That was. Here's Malcolm on the line in Glasgow. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call. A little bit unhappy at Israel just took the lead against Scotland 1 minute ago.
Oh, really? Really? Well, they're always very close games.
Yeah, they're a good team, Israel. It's nice to see there's crowds in the stadiums there. I think they've had the vaccinations, most of them. I had mine today.
Yeah, they have. They've vaccinated more or less everybody. The UAE is the second highest percentage of people vaccinated, and Britain is the third. Not bad for us.
Yeah, I think it's a good way out. George, very quickly, I'll give you a backstory. I hope you're familiar with it so you can wax lyrical on it if you are familiar with it. But
okay.
For those viewers listening, is that Scotland issued advice that people should not travel more than 5 miles, and specifically not to the Highlands and the islands where you had an ageing population that weren't well served by hospitals. So there was a small island in Scotland that had 170 residents, mostly aging, and they set up a Facebook page to say to people, you're not following the guidance, you should be in your primary residence, you should go home and not threaten our lives, as an old people. So there was a Facebook page, and they were openly saying to people, you should go home. Now, I don't know how to say this, but there was a government advisor of the SNP who 2 days before this came out officially moved to an island of 170 people with his family. Now, you have to think that he's had a heads up and he knows that he shouldn't do that. So he did it 2 days before the official announcement came out. So when this 70-year-old man who suffers from diabetes was saying to people, you should go home and you should leave us and to be safe, the police finally arrived at his door, and he thought, finally, they're taking action and they come to interview me about these people who shouldn't be here. Now, the police, who basically galvanized themselves to go to an island, are basically now calling him a racist, and they're calling him as an aggressive person because he had a conversation with the wife of a government advisor who was passing by his house, and he said, you should go home. And because of the wife in question was originally from Zimbabwe and black, she called him a racist, and he had 6 months of legal fees and of being accused of being a racist. And that was, am I correct in thinking that the police sit in the cabinet with the Scottish Parliament? And who sent these police officers to this 70-year-old man to say correctly, you're not following guidance, go home. And under my final point, George, is under the hate crime law now, he would have been found guilty. He was found not guilty on all charges in Oban recently, and this is just a disgrace. It's another salmon witch hunt disgrace from the SNP government, as far as I'm concerned. We're not allowed to talk about it.
Not Salmond, of course. He's not guilty of that particular crime. This is entirely Nicola Sturgeon and Hamza Yousaf's hate crime law. That is quite a convoluted story you told me. I'm not sure I fully grasped it, but I'd make sure the Scottish newspapers knew about it, because it has literally everything. It's got a government advisor and his wife, who's a Zimbabwean. It's got a government minister who just moved to an island 2 days before he would not have been allowed to do so. It's got people telling other people to go home. It's got everything, Malcolm. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. I didn't know any of that. Sean is in Lanarkshire on Craig Murray. Breaking news, is it, Sean?
Hi, George. I'm not too sure about breaking news, but
and actually, I don't think we're going to get a sentence until the day after the Scottish Parliament elections, actually, which may or may not be significant.
Well, I suppose that you could look at some of the dates and see that there's some strange coincidences, but if we started looking at all the strange coincidences in the dates concerning the SNP in recent years, we would be here forever.
Yeah.
But George, I'd like to highlight a good friend of yours in the show is Craig Murray's plight at the moment.
Yeah.
I watched a wee podcast that he done recently, and I saw a man that was suffering under the weight of obviously a lot of people's malice towards him, and in my opinion, certainly my reading of the case. And I'd just like to urge anybody that's listening to please support him and like the work that he's doing and subscribe. He seems to be suggesting that he's finding it difficult to write on his podcasts and things just now.
Well, he's afraid to, in case he compounds the offence that has been taken. Sean, thanks for bringing that up. Craig, I have absolutely profound political differences with Craig Murray on the question of breaking up Britain, but I absolutely acknowledge his honourable track record as a public servant, as an ambassador, as a civil servant, and now as a campaigner. Few men or women in this country have the honour that Craig Murray deserves. He gave up, effectively invited the sack from the Blair government and Jack Straw, the then Foreign Secretary, for condemning the use of torture and disappearance in Uzbekistan when he was the British ambassador there. He was literally sacked for, and I quote, over-focusing on human rights, unquote. Remember that the next time you hear the British talking about other people's human rights. Craig Murray was sacked as the British ambassador to Uzbekistan for over-focusing on human rights. And since then, Craig Murray has, in the most honourable and eloquent way, spoken out against one crime after another, most particularly the Iraq War, which is where I came to know him best. And he appeared most notably in my film, The Killings of Tony Blair. If you haven't seen that yet, I commend it to you in my shop, www.georgegalloway.shop. It's a film that everybody needs to see, and Craig Murray plays a significant part in that film. Craig Murray has been found guilty, not by a jury, but by the bench in the Scottish High Court of contempt of court. While I, who read every word, and twice every word that he wrote throughout the whole Alex Salmond saga, I would say that not only was he not guilty of contempt of court, he was guilty only of over-focusing on the importance of justice. Craig Murray is an honourable man, and if he is sent to prison by the Scottish justice system, it will compound the overwhelming feeling amongst thinking people in Scotland and beyond that there is something darkly, deeply rotten in the Scottish judicial system. If Craig Murray, at his age, his level of infirmity, a man who's been giving everything he could to save Julian Assange from dying in prison, may himself go to prison and be at risk of death. It would be a monstrous travesty of justice if Craig Murray was the only person to go to jail as a result of the framing of Alec Salmond. Now, sometimes your water tells you something. And I just knew that what my editor said in that script I was reading about That Was the Week was not right. He said that Apple was the biggest company in the world. In fact, it's the 5th biggest company in the world. Here they are. Walmart is the biggest company in the world, worth £542 billion. The China Petroleum and Chemical Corporation is the second biggest, £355.8 billion. Third is Amazon, which is the one I thought was the biggest. That's worth £321.8 billion. PetroChina, who knew that 2 out of the top 5 biggest companies in the world were Chinese? The PetroChina Company Limited is worth £320 billion. And Apple Inc., in 5th place, is $273.9 billion. All of those were dollars. Did I say pounds? Anyway, let me give you the phone numbers again. If you're in the UK, 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. The poll is still running, at least for another 15 minutes. Will Alec Salmond hold the balance of power after the May elections? Yes, 20% of you, that's up 1. No, 33% of you, that's no change. See, you wish a plague on both their houses, 47%. Go to my Twitter feed right now, at George Galloway, and you can vote. Let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Call me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum.
No,
let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on.
But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and the people who work there? Have you looked at the global
I know nothing about them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But I'm not interested.
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring. Just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Let's go to Hawaii. Who wouldn't? Especially in this period when we can't go anywhere at all. And hear from Albert. Go ahead, Albert.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
Good. Lovely to talk to you in Hawaii.
Yes, it's been a while.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little about what's occurred with the Suez Canal.
Yes.
You have that ship that's stuck there.
Yes.
The reason why I wanted to bring that up is the impact on shipping. One of the things that I've noted this recently, is I think, to me, there's a major problem with the size of container ships, for example.
Yeah, this one, this evergreen one is the size of a New York skyscraper.
Yeah, about the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
Because they're building more and more larger container ships. And what's happening is a lot of these ports, they have to start dredging. They have to have all these dredging projects like they do in Miami, in the port of Boston. They've been dredging like crazy more recently to expand the ports and to expand that. And so when you look at what happened with the Suez Canal, apparently it wasn't enough dredging for the ship. So the reason I bring this up is it's part of I think, one of the big problems in regards to not only societies, but the idea of shipping. Is you have these gigantic ships that are being built as opposed to the past.
Well, I think it's a really interesting subject. I actually broadcast on this during this week with my good friend Manila Chan on In Question on RT America, which I do every night, Monday to Friday. And the way I put it there was that a camel had got stuck in the eye of a needle. And that's what it looked like to me. The truth is these container ships are getting bigger and bigger, but the Suez Canal is not getting bigger and bigger. And in fact, the more you dredge it, the more you risk instability of the banks and so on. So we have all of our eggs in the Suez Canal basket, and that has never been healthy. And I talked to Manila in the week about the plan the United States had, believe this or not, in 1963. The US planned using 25 nuclear bombs, nuclear explosions, to carve a new canal through Israel to the sea. And they only actually abandoned that plan, not for the danger of radiation, but because of the cost of it. But there are other routes. There are two problems with those other routes. The route around the Horn of Africa takes 2 weeks longer. And, of course, the waters off the Horn of Africa are absolutely infested with piracy. And there's lots of pirates, of course, big pirates and small pirates. These are small pirates. And anyone sailing past is at very real risk of being boarded by pirates and held to ransom. But there is a second route, and you may think I'm crazy advancing it, but the northern route that Russia could facilitate with its nuclear ice-breaking technology is actually shorter than the Suez Canal route, much shorter, therefore, than the Horn of Africa route, and the ability to keep it clear for tanker and container ship traffic is now with us. These nuclear icebreakers that Russia has can clear a path for anything instantaneously. So I think we need to look again at this policy of having all our eggs in the Suez Canal basket. Albert, thanks for that call. Dale is in Surrey. Let's hear from him. Dale, go ahead.
Oh, hi, George. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Welcome.
First of all, I just wanted to let you know, before I get to my main point, that Apple is actually the biggest company in the world if you go by market capitalization rather than revenue.
Yeah, it's difficult to do that, though, between different sectors. But I take your point. I'm sure the editor will be making that point to me.
Excellent. So I wanted to get your opinion on two things. The first one being, probably seen in the news, that China's boycotting, along with the population, Nike, Adidas, Burberry, all these big companies that are making false accusations against China with regards to Xinjiang.
China is fighting back on all fronts.
Yeah, and because I think they've had enough of this sort of Western anti-China propaganda that's being spewed out by these companies.
As well they might,
Yeah, but I also wanted to get your opinion about the MPs that have been sanctioned by China now for doing exactly the same thing, spewing out rubbish about China.
Well, it is funny, Dale, the bleating that has occurred, both in the European Parliament and now in the British Parliament, about China sanctioning them, when they are literally never done sanctioning China. As the old fella said in Dad's Army, they don't like it up them. Some of them do, as it happens, but they don't like sanctions up them. They are more than happy to dish them out, but they are not happy at all when there is a reciprocation. China is being framed on all manner of subjects, but on no subject more than the fake allegations of repression and even, ridiculously enough, genocide against the Uyghur Muslim minority in Xinjiang province. This is a bigger canard than any since the weapons of mass destruction lie that dragged us into the catastrophe of the Iraq war and occupation, the proliferation of Al-Qaeda, the spawning of ISIS, and so on. This is such a complete lie from exactly the same people who gave us the weapons of mass destruction lie. It is such a complete lie that China is not prepared any longer to put up with it, especially coming from politicians and countries that have actually been bombing, invading, and occupying Muslim countries for most of the last 20 years. You feel me, Dale?
Exactly. What was that thing you mentioned earlier about MPs were actually telling other MPs not to focus too much on human rights?
Exactly. We sacked Craig Murray for over-focusing on human rights in Uzbekistan, but China has to be the whipping boy on everything from Tibet to Taiwan. And China especially is angry because it's quite plain, for lots of reasons, including the one I've just given, that these people doing this don't give a toss about Muslims. Not a toss. They're prepared to bomb, sanction, kill, occupy Muslims everywhere. They hate Muslims everywhere, but they sure love them in China. China has a problem with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, not with Muslims. The Muslims in China are thriving, both in terms of their population numbers and their economic, social, cultural, and religious well-being. This is a gigantic lie. Dale, I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to say so. Let's go to Jamie in Malaga. Go ahead, Jamie.
Hello, George. Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. I'm firing on all cylinders now.
Excellent. I can hear it. Fantastic. Thanks for taking my call. It was really just to say how totally appalled I am at the judgment against Craig Murray.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, literally.
Absolutely disgraceful. I just think, there they are trying to silence yet another journalist.
Yeah.
With their corrupt
a man who's been campaigning for the other silenced journalist, Julian Assange.
Exactly. did you know that Julian, I think it was this morning, received a letter from the Pope?
Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. Didn't know that. No, tell us what you know.
Yeah, there was a statement by Stella Morris on Twitter this afternoon where she says that the prison chaplain delivered the letter to Julian this morning.
I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So really, that was what I wanted to say.
Well, hallelujah, and God bless the Pope. That was a very important and noble thing for him to have done. A good friend of mine, Ambassador Alicia Castro, the former ambassador of Argentina to London, who is a very good friend of Julian Assange and a very good friend of the Pope. She has been trying to interest His Holiness in this case for a very long time and get him to take action. So maybe that is what has happened. If Ambassador Alicia is listening or ever hears this, I take my hat off to you for all that you did to push the Holy See into seeing what exactly has been going on with Julian Assange. Jamie in Malaga, thank you very much indeed for that call. We're coming to the end of the Alex Salmond poll. So here's the next poll. Should vaccine passports be mandatory? A, yes. B, no. C, only for travel. You can vote now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Coming up after 9, we have, of course, our own Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. So get your calls in now if you want to ask the doctor a question, either about the vaccine or the vaccine passports or anything of that kind. So the UK number is 02077 982 255. That's 02077 982 255. Or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Time for Tarif in New Orleans. Go ahead, Tarif.
How you doing, Mr. George? This is Tyree Simon calling from New Orleans, Louisiana. Thank y'all for taking my call, and thank you for having this great show.
Thank you.
I was glad when I saw that posting by Stella Morris that Julian Assange received a encouragement from the Pope Francis, and that was a good thing. And I'm glad the other caller brought it up. That is a good blessing. I hope that push the British government to free him sooner than later. You know what I'm saying? Because we need all their help to free him. Then we got to start working on Craig Maury and the other journalists and whistleblowers around the world to free them as well. I'm also a whistleblower. I'm a VA Veterans Affairs whistleblower. My name is Tyree Simon. And also, U.S. need a serious trend data infrastructure program. They got some places here in the United States still don't have good running water. I come to find out Jackson, Mississippi last week, 125,000 people still without water because their pipes bust through the winter freeze.
Wow.
That's not right. And Flint pipes have yet. I don't know if y'all guests know about Flint, Michigan.
Yes, the lead in the water, yeah?
Yes. Their pipes haven't been replaced yet. They still need help, and they need to be all put on Medicare, to take care of their hospital bills, because you have children being born with learning disabilities from lead poisoning. You have people suffering nerve damage from lead poisoning. You have people suffering memory loss and all those things, and they don't have the money already poor because the automotive industry it had packed up and left and went to ship to Mexico and other places, and that decimated Michigan. So when Flint and Detroit used to be middle class, they're not middle class anymore. They like poor. Joe Biden have to invest in Michigan and Flint. They have to invest in New Jersey. They pipes, something wrong with their pipes. Houston and also Jackson, Mississippi. Matter of fact, all 5,800 counties and cities. Because our pipes here in the United States is like third world nations or worse.
Wow.
And free Julian Assange. And thank you for taking my call, Mr.
Thank you for a most powerful call, a tour de horizon. But the fact that the United States has a water pipe system comparable in many parts of the country, north and south of the country, to, as Tarif puts it, a third world country, is as powerful a case for the United States paying more attention to its own business and less attention to other people's business, isn't it? That's my view in any case. If the United States would spend a fraction rebuilding its own country that it has spent destroying other people's countries, if it spent as much energy in its political and media class on the problems at home in the United States as it spends on trying to solve problems in other people's countries, that would be a fine thing. And I think the people of the United States would probably thank them for it. But what do they matter? Let's get the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The British government remains confident everyone in the UK will get a second dose of the COVID vaccine within 12 weeks of their first, the Culture Secretary has said. Questioned about the concerns over vaccine supply, Oliver Dowden said, "We always knew there would be ups and downs," adding that the timetable was on track. He said it was essential to provide second doses and it would not require mixing vaccines. Dowden added that the Moderna jab was due to arrive in the UK in April. It's the third vaccine of 7 that the UK has put in an order for, and the country is lined up to receive 17 million doses. So far, more than 30 million UK adults have received their first coronavirus vaccine from either the Pfizer or the Oxford jabs, and more than 3 million of them have had a second. But vaccine supply issues have continued to make the rollout bumpy. Earlier this month, the NHS warned of a significant reduction in jabs available in England in April, and there has been a delay to Oxford AstraZeneca's shipments from India. There are also tensions from the EU over the supply of jabs. Lorry drivers, cabin crew, prison escorts and seasonal workers entering England from outside the UK will need to take a COVID-19 test within 48 hours of arrival, the government has said. Those remaining in the UK for longer than 2 days will be required to take a further test every 3 days. The new regime is intended to stop the virus spreading and new variants entering. The new rules take effect from the 6th of April. MP Neil Hanvey has become the second one to defect from the SNP to join Alex Salmond's new pro-Scottish independence party, ALBA. The MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath said that ALBA provided, quote, a tonic for our movement. On Saturday, former Justice Secretary Kenny McCaskill announced he would also stand as a candidate for ALBA. Alex Salmond launched the party on Friday with the aim of building, quote, a supermajority for independence at Holyrood after the election in May. Suez Canal salvage teams are alternating between dredging and tugging as they continue to try to dislodge the massive container ship blocking the busy waterway. Dredgers have so far shifted 27,000 cubic metres of sand to a depth of 18 metres, with work set to continue around the clock. The 400-metre long Ever Given became jammed diagonally across a southern section of the canal in high winds more than 5 days ago, halting shipping traffic in one of the world's busiest waterways. As of yesterday, 321 boats were waiting to get through the canal, including dozens of container ships, bulk carriers and oil tankers. Airstrikes that sent villagers fleeing into the jungle show the situation in Myanmar is much worse, a humanitarian worker has said, as military leaders reportedly partied on the deadliest day of violence since last month's coup. More gunfire has been reported today as people gathered for the funeral of one of at least 114 people said to have been killed by security forces yesterday, including a 5-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl. Local media is reporting that around 3,000 people from Myanmar's southeastern Karen state have left the country and crossed the border into Thailand to escape the violence. Despite the bloodshed, protesters returned to the streets today to demand a return to democracy. David Eubank, founder of the humanitarian group Free Burma Rangers, said airstrikes on a village in Karen killed at least 3 people and wounded 8 others. He said the first airstrike struck around 8:30 p.m. local time on Saturday, and more hit between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. today. 2 top UN officials condemned Myanmar's military junta today in a joint statement. Today, Alice Wairimu-Nderitu, UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, and Michelle Bachelet, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, urged the Myanmar military to immediately stop killing the very people it has a duty to serve and protect. A suspected suicide bomb attack outside a Catholic church in the Indonesian city of Makassar has left 14 people wounded, police say. An explosion erupted as 2 attackers tried to enter the church on Palm Sunday, the first day of Easter. A destroyed motorbike and body parts were found at the scene, and police said the 2 attackers had died. Militant Islamists have attacked churches in the past, but no group has yet said it was behind the bombing. Indonesia's president, Joko Widodo, condemned the act as a terror attack. Facebook has frozen Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's page after he claimed without evidence that a herbal remedy could cure COVID-19. He said in January that a thyme herb solution could cure the disease. He will be unable to post for 30 days. The company said the leader has repeatedly violated its policies on coronavirus disinformation. Maduro is not the only world leader to face a ban from social media companies over COVID. US President Donald Trump and Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro have also faced action over COVID posts. And finally, a 6-year-old boy has found a fossil dating back millions of years in his garden after receiving a fossil hunting kit for Christmas. Siddhak Singh Jamat, known as Sid, said he was excited to find the fossil in his garden in Walsall after digging for worms. His father Vish Singh was able to identify the horned coral through a fossil group he is a member of on Facebook. The group identified the find as most likely a rugosa coral, estimated to be between 251 and 488 million years old. Singh Sr. said, quote, the period that they existed was from between 500 million and 251 million years ago, the Paleozoic era. England at the time was part of Pangaea, a landmass of continents. England was all underwater as well. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Well, the second poll has gone off like a rocket. Should vaccine passports be mandatory? A, yes, 23% up 2. B, no, 55% down 1. C, only for travel, 22% up 1. 746 people have voted in about 7 minutes. You've got the best part of an hour to get your vote in. Now, we spoke, of course, about the travel implications of the coronavirus to Lisa Nand earlier. Let's talk to our own medic, Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, who's helped us through all of this, through the entire pandemic. Dr. Brar, thank you very much again for joining us. It looks like this vaccine passport issue is going to be the next big tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. That's my take. You may have a different one. No need for us both to agree on it. But if I have a restaurant It's up to me if I allow people who will not say whether or not they've been vaccinated into my restaurant or not. Ditto if I own an airline. I understand that no medicine should be compulsory, but neither should it be compulsory for workplaces, businesses, to allow people who refuse to get a vaccine into their premises. You can't have it both ways. That would be my take on it. In any case, if most of the anti-vax people are very proud of being anti-vax, so why wouldn't they want to tell people that they have not had the vaccination? Where do you stand on that, Doctor?
George, good to be with you. So I have slightly mixed feelings. As you say, my general feeling is, first, do no harm. We're here to protect the public. There's a really cherished bond of trust between physicians, between doctor and patient, which shouldn't be broken, and that has to take into account the views and decision making. Really, our job is to empower our patients and to put them in control of their health. Now, of course, infectious disease, there is an extra dimension, as you say, that if I get an infectious disease and I freely go around trying to spread it to everyone, if I had HIV and I tried to have unprotected sex with everyone I met, people would generally agree that was morally reprehensible. There is no vaccine for HIV, so it's not a direct analysis, but there's a duty to protect others as well. So I think coronavirus is an interesting. The nature of the disease, I think, informs our opinion. It's a disease which, for young, fit patients, is not particularly harmful. This is what's so strange about the disease and why there's so much kind of controversy still persists around it. But of course, for the elderly, for the vulnerable, for the infirm, it's an extremely harmful disease, and hence why that patient population in particular have been, shielding. They've been the most affected in terms of the deaths around the country, and they have been the first to be vaccinated. Once you have vaccinated that group of patients, actually, the risk of death and the risk of the disease falls dramatically. It's been the role of the COVID, the anti-vaxxers, the COVID deniers, for want of a better word, the people who say this whole thing is a conspiracy against the public, has been saying, well, COVID is no worse than the common cold. That is totally false. It's no worse than the flu. That is totally false, okay? It has been a much more severe disease. However, for a section of the population who are young and fit, it's not particularly worse for you than the flu. So if there are a group amongst that population who feel they don't want to have the vaccine, who'd rather get the virus, essentially, well, I think, it's not the choice I would make. It's not the choice I would encourage. I tend to think we need to, preserve persuasion amongst that group. So I wouldn't enforce a COVID passport, but I'm not in control of policy. It's quite clear the signals from government, from industry, from other countries are it will be introduced, it will affect travel, and I don't think there's anything we can do about it. Would I rail against it? Would I make it a point of campaigning? Probably not particularly. I mean, if I go abroad and I want to visit a country that has yellow fever and they make me get a document to say I've had a yellow fever vaccine, I think that's reasonable. That's probably their right. So, I can see both sides of the argument. Fundamentally, the vaccine is extremely efficacious and extremely safe. And it's the single thing that we've probably done, relatively well in the pandemic. So I'm in favour of people having the vaccine when it's offered, George.
Now, how is the vaccination going? In Scotland, where I live, it has slowed up. I'm still waiting for my second jab, and it's slowed up for reasons which are not immediately discernible. Some say that we're running out of stock. Some say it's the European Union playing silly people with the export of vaccines. And this is tied up with the AstraZeneca issue that we have discussed before, where millions of doses of this vaccine are in the European Union but not being used. Give us your overview on the state of vaccination in Britain and in Europe.
Well, it was very interesting to see. I don't know if you're aware of Boris Johnson's comments that he made to the 1922 committee just on Tuesday, apparently in a private Zoom meeting, but that leaked out when he said, my friends, the success of the vaccination program is due to greed and due to capitalism, and he was censured for being so open and honest. So there's unquestionably there is money to be made. I mean, greed and capitalism is not synonymous with human technology and its success. There's no question that vaccination has had a key effect in Britain. However, it's also led to all the many manifold failings of our handling of the pandemic, probably 150,000 deaths, failures over PPE procurement, failures over ventilator procurement, ignoring Operation Cygnus, running down the capacity of the NHS, the failure to protect the NHS by safeguarding the pain conditions of the nurses and doctors who we are offered a 1% pay rise, the rank and manifest corruption. If you wanted any more evidence that our politicians seek office not to serve the public but to serve themselves, to serve their own wallets, you don't have to look a lot further than the revelations about Citigroup and Cameron and the affair that he was mixed up with Greenhill Capital. So there's again and again and again from Matt Hancock giving 250 million to his publican, to the amount of money that was wasted on an ineffectual track and trace system. We have seen that the profit motive, putting profit at the heart of the response to the pandemic, has been what has gone wrong. However, vaccines are made by these massive multinational companies, and vaccine itself is a technology which has done very well. I think if our government were truly worried about the health and well-being of the population, they would accept vaccine from any and every source. It's clear that they have only accepted it from these very big, wealthy, in Boris Johnson's word, greedy capitalist producers. They haven't accepted the Sputnik vaccine, which is probably the most efficacious and relatively cheap. They are very shortly to roll out the Moderna vaccine, which actually had several billions worth of funding from the US government, which wasn't developed by the risk appetite of private finance initiative at all, but in fact we had massive state funding. They will roll that out, but they will not roll out vaccines of people they see to be their strategic competitors. So, this cuts across the claim that their motivation is the health and well-being of the British public. That said,
it cuts across the claim. In fact, it doesn't bear a moment's examination. If it was capitalism and greed, then the doctor would negotiate with us before he put the needle in our arms. If it was down to the market, they would have auctioned off the vaccinations. Instead of saying the 80-year-olds first, they'd say, who's prepared to pay? It would be like an auction with a hammer. Yes, it goes to you. You've bid X thousand for your vaccine. Also, the Oxford AstraZeneca is selling at cost price. It's quite a high cost price compared to Sputnik and to the Chinese version. But if Oxford AstraZeneca were obeying the diktat of capitalism and greed, their injections would cost vastly more, especially in the beginning, than they actually did cost. The doctors would negotiate with us before actually doing the work to give it to us. The fireman would negotiate with the homeowner on the pavement outside. How much is it worth to you for me to plunge into your burning building and rescue your imperiled child? It's actual arrant nonsense, Doctor.
I think that's extremely true, George. And if you want to see the extremes to which sometimes private healthcare can go to, there are examples, of private healthcare firms in the United States, in India, in other places, performing unnecessary procedures, actual bodily harm in order to take the maximum from their patient's pocket or from their patient's insurance plan. And I'm afraid to say what we're seeing is our healthcare going further and further down that road. It's interesting to see the Signet Group, which is a large British subsidiary of a large American multinational health firm, have appointed Dame Claire Gerada. Dame Claire Gerada is a psychiatrist and GP who was formerly president of the Royal College of Physicians. She was actually elected to that position on the basis of her being anti-privatization, but now she's been elected to the board of this very large private health conglomerate, has been chosen by, picked out by Sir Simon Stevens, has obviously been made a dame for this championing of this interaction between private finance and the NHS. So we're seeing the constant encroachment in every sphere, but also the NHS, of private capital upon our model of healthcare delivery. And this goes hand in hand, of course, with what we previously discussed, which was the 56 GP practices which passed into the hands of essentially US private corporation just a couple of weeks back. George.
Let's take a call, Doctor, from Ian in Hounslow. Ian, go ahead. What would you like to ask the doctor?
Good evening. I'd like to ask you, Dr. Brar, what is the limiting factor of two options on the vaccine rollout? Is it because we don't have enough vaccines, or is it because our distribution points have choke points where we can't get them out fast enough? What do you think is going on, or is it not an issue?
Thanks for your question. I think initially, probably the rate-limiting step is the overall supply of vaccine. Having said which, if we've vaccinated 30 million, it's very close to half of the population. They are the most at risk. We know 3.5 million have now had their second doses. So, it would be possible if the NHS staffing levels were higher to administer more, if we had more vaccine. It is possible to manufacture more vaccine. I think that has essentially been a supply issue. But that said, if you compare ourselves to other countries, the supply has been, relatively well rolled out.
Thanks, Ian. Ronwell in Chicago is the birthday boy, and he has a question for the doctor. Happy birthday, Ronwell.
Thank you, George Galloway.
You're welcome. Many happy returns to you. What would you like to ask Dr. Ranjeet?
All right. So, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, I wish you to say me happy birthday. So, anyway, how when would the SuperThanks 5 come to U.S.? Because most of my friends are vaccinated, including my family. I believe Pfizer, and I'd rather be vaccinated with Sputnik 5.
You and me both, Ronwell. I asked if I could take the vaccine, the Sputnik 5 vaccine, live on air here in the mother of all talk shows, but the British authorities wouldn't allow the vaccine to come into Britain. It's a big scandal, that, isn't it, Doctor?
I think it is, George. It says, Ronwell, happy birthday. Congratulations. It's a totally reasonable request to say I would like to be vaccinated with a particular vaccine. However, I don't think the US will grant Sputnik 5 a vaccine. That's not because it's not an excellent license in the United States. That's not because it's not an excellent vaccine. It's because that they are into trade protectionism in the same way that our own country is, while strongly accusing China of vaccine nationalism, of very aggressive propaganda in the beginning stages, middle stage of the pandemic, of saying that China should pay reparations of hundreds of billions to the world, of accusing China of being the party who was at fault for the entire pandemic. All of this kind of propaganda is grist to their mill. And we can see with the recent developments this week just how far that antipathy to China in the US and Britain is going. And China finally defending itself and hitting back with the very obvious, there's like an open goal waiting to be scored. George laid out the case very well early on. I won't recapitulate it, but it's good to see China and Russia defending themselves. But the chances of US and Britain, EU countries accepting Chinese and Russian vaccines are not related to their efficacy. They're very low precisely because they see them as the key global economic competitors. And it's the economic factors throughout the pandemic which have conditioned the response of our governments, and why I think, much as I'd like to see Sputnik 5 in particular given a license in Britain, I am not holding my breath. I do not think it will happen.
Enjoy the rest of your birthday, Ronwell. Of course, this conflict, Dr. Ranjeet, it's not just between East and West. The European Union countries are fighting like ferrets in a sack with each other, and with us. It's hard to believe that Brexit isn't part of the reason for that, isn't it?
It is. That's definitely part of it. But, the EU, with a very large 450 million population, are experiencing, no doubt about it, another wave, third wave, fourth wave, third wave of the pandemic. And, if you see the numbers of cases, France has leapfrogged Britain and Russia. It's become the fourth largest number of test-proven cases in the world. It's gone to 4.5 million cases, close to 100,000 deaths. Italy's got 100,000 deaths from COVID. So Europe, due to its poor vaccination status, as well as its poor non-pharmaceutical measures, is suffering greatly, and they have a real, unquestionably, supply problem due to slightly reasons of competition. They see that AstraZeneca as a British competitor to the Pfizer. They have rubbished it at the early stages. The French President Macron was actively involved in that. They've had to step down from that, but nevertheless, as you say, many doses that are not being given. They've threatened, nevertheless, to limit the export of doses of Pfizer from the EU to Britain on the basis that they need it more. They've limited the export of doses to other countries as well. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany has openly said on a number of occasions now, in conflict with the central apparatus of the EU, that she thinks Germany should give a license to and roll out the Sputnik vaccine. They're in desperate need of giving it to their population, and it's quite clearly a sensible thing for them to do. But again, the interests of their large big pharmaceutical companies, of their banking sector, of their finance sector, mean that they don't want to lose that intense world competition. They don't want to send a signal that they are incapable of managing that through their own technology and development. So there's a massive conflict between the health and well-being of the working people of the European Union countries and large capital, which only wants to promote their own technology in order to make a lot of money out of the vehicle of the pandemic from selling their own vaccine to the rest of the world, George.
Gerard in Kilwinning in Ayrshire. Gerard, go ahead.
Good evening, George. Good evening, Dr. Brar. Thanks for taking my call. I would just say that I'm a young guy in my 30s and I'm definitely going to get the vaccine, so I would hope that all my peers do that as well. My concern, George and Dr. Brar, is this. Ever since the beginning of the pandemic, ever since the killing of George Floyd, actually, we have seen a lot of different protests in this country. Some good, some noble causes like Black Lives Matter, some idiotic like anti-vaccine protests. The problem is this, and I know there's this issue about, does it affect ethnic minorities more than white people, the virus, but inherently it's not a racist disease. It affects everyone, men, women, the elderly, the young. But every time I see a protest like the Bristol one, people packed in like sardines, my head is in my hands because I'm just thinking to myself, these are people, they're going to be young people there who have not had the vaccine yet, potentially getting it, potentially spreading it to their parents, their grandparents. And I'm just thinking to myself, we're doing this consistently for the last year, protests, demonstrations, when we've been told by the medical professionals, do not gather in large groups. It just seems such a contradiction, and it's the worst thing to be doing, especially when the end is sight, when there is light at the end of the tunnel. I wish people would stay. I know there's noble causes out there, but I'm just so concerned, like I say, my head in my hands. I don't know if you are as well, Doctor, at these protests, again, no matter how noble the cause is, because this is going to surely spread the virus.
Powerful call, Gerard. Thanks very much for making it. Doctor?
I understand the points that Gerard makes, but I have a slightly different take, I think. So I think, yes, at the beginning. So if you look at when there are very few cases in the country, it would have been fantastic to prevent them spreading. You're stopping foreign football teams from coming and playing games from hotspots to our country, stopping flights from hotspots to our country. All of those kind of measures would have been sensible. Stopping massive race course meetings, they would have been sensible. Stopping people, of course, have mainly spread it through work and school throughout the pandemic, really. 12 or 13, more like 20 million of us have been regularly going to work. Many have been regularly going to school. So, and it's been the poorest, of course, who have been the most affected because they've been least able to shelter, least able to stop their economic activity, because then they face the very real threat of starvation. So it's not been equally distributed. It's been the poorest most of all. And of course, as the economic crisis has hit, the poor and the vulnerable have been particularly hard hit. So they are rightly up in arms about the many different social conditions that they face. And I do feel that a lot of if you look at the Sarah Everard protest, for example, a socially distanced outside protest, most participants, young women, most wearing masks, coming to express very legitimate outpouring of grief. Really kind of, I guess, a protest against the perpetrators of that crime as well. The very heavy-handed policing was justified on the basis of stopping the spread of coronavirus. To me, that does not scan at all, and particularly now, not just with the end in sight, but actually if 30 million people have been vaccinated, then it essentially means that the most vulnerable to the coronavirus are now protected. If we look at the rates, we didn't actually mention them, but we're talking about this week 450 deaths, so not zero, but far fewer, and that's kind of the tail end of many people, of course, have had prolonged illnesses from this wave. But the people who are down, actually in hospitals, are down to 5% of the hospital population, and really only about 38,000 test-proven cases a week. We're talking about now quite a small number. On protest itself will have a minimal impact upon the further spread of coronavirus. And I do think it's actually unlikely we're going to see the kind of wave that they're currently experiencing in Europe. So now more than ever, it's important, I think, with a large percentage of the population, possibly the unemployment rate, the economically inactive rate of the population going up higher than we've seen in our lifetime, from around the quarter, 25%, to around the 33%, at 1/3% of our working age population are not in work. Some of them very, very wealthy. The vast majority will not be. So there will be many legitimate grievances. And we've seen the crime courts, police sentencing bill, forgive me, I've got the name slightly wrong, which is an extremely draconian act. Not to say that there aren't already many powers resting with the state to curb demonstration, but we're going to have a very discontented population who have increasingly fewer and fewer avenues to voice their opposition to the fact that their position is becoming more marginalised, but they're becoming poorer. They're facing real problems. And at the moment, it's incredible, really, in the face of the mismanagement of this pandemic, to see that the Tories riding high in the polls. But that's a reflection of people's disillusionment with Labour. And so a real political opposition needs to come forward. An element of that will be demonstrations. I think COVID less and less will be seen as a legitimate reason to curb protest and demonstration. I'm sorry if that's at odds with your view or indeed yours, George, but increasingly that's my opinion.
You're here to give your opinion to the listeners and viewers. Thanks, Gerard. Mark is in Leicestershire. Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Hi, George. Hi, Ranjeet. Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome.
It's just a call regarding herd immunity. And I know it's obviously started initially when the coronavirus actually come about, but my point now, I can't really find any information, and nobody's really talking about it in the actual media, but herd immunity is defined that obviously when you actually catch a virus, you cannot pass it on. But with having the first vaccine and the second vaccine, you can actually catch coronavirus still, and you can still pass it on. And I just wonder what your thoughts were regarding the herd immunity in that regard.
Thanks, Mark. Doctor?
Thanks, Mark. So herd immunity had two aspects to it, didn't it? So it had the original Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings strategy was essentially do nothing, let the virus run throughout the population and just let it run its course. We know if we had really let it run its course without any vaccination intervening and supervening, then probably that would have led to over 1 million deaths in the country, estimates between 500,000 and 1 million. But looking at the rates as they were unfolding without vaccination, probably closer or even in excess of 1 million deaths. So it's a very large number of deaths that we would have talked about by a natural herd immunity. And that just simply, to me, expressed the fact that, again, in the word of Dominic Cummings himself, it was herd immunity, protect the economy, and if a few pensioners die, so be it. The fact that, the lives of working people is worth little to them. And the main thing was the economy. They couldn't protect the economy, of course, because of the world economic collapse and depression that we're facing. In terms of the vaccine, of course, vaccine is a different thing. So if we do achieve a certain rate of vaccination in the population, then we will essentially stop the spread of the vaccine. There can be some variants. There will be fewer variants to the extent that we have a successful vaccine rollout. So, we will achieve. I mean, if you look at herd immunity as a general strategy in the absence of vaccination, Sweden was always held up as a glowing example. It's now widely recognized that that's not the case. It had rates of 12 or 15 times in terms of deaths and cases compared to its Scandinavian neighbors who had similar population ages and conditions of existence. So just herd immunity by itself, without really good non-pharmaceutical measures to protect the working lives of people, was poor. Herd immunity, meaning vaccinate enough of the population, you really do protect the population. Yes, that will work.
Thanks, Mark. John is in Thirsk. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. Hi, Doctor.
Hi.
My question is, my partner and I have both had our first vaccines. My partner has MS, and we've been incredibly kind of judicious in terms of going out and what have you. She's been out 4 times since March of last year. You know, so that's tough for her. This question of the vaccine passport, neither of us have smartphones, and that's not a question of kind of economics. It's a question that we don't want them. And it seems to me that the entire scheme is predicated upon actually having these phones rather than having something that is either paper or a, you know, what was originally suggested with national, you know, not national passports, you know,
vaccine passports. Yeah. But as was pointed out earlier, John, I've been to many countries in what is called the third world, where I had to produce a certificate that I had been vaccinated against particular diseases in their country. There's nothing novel about that. Now, you can show it on a bit of paper or you can show it on your phone. I'm struggling with why this is such a big issue for you and others.
But the government seems to be going down the road of only having and allowing it on smartphones.
Well, you might need to get a smartphone then, John, but otherwise you could not travel to places that were requiring you to show that you'd had a vaccine.
Well, I don't want to. I just want to go to my local pub and my local restaurant.
Well, there'll be a market in that. There'll be some pubs that will not want to look at your vaccination record, and there'll be other pubs that will. That's almost inevitable, I would have thought. But if I own a pub, I never could or would, of course, being a total non-drinker, but if I owned a pub, I might well take the view that for the protection of my staff, myself, and the rest of my customers, I only want people that have been vaccinated to come and drink in it. What would be wrong? What would be wrong with me doing that?
I understand that bit, but why should it be a technology-based thing?
What's your alternative?
Well, we have some kind of document. As presumably when you went abroad, you didn't have a smartphone app.
No, I didn't. These were in the days long before smartphones. I'll ask the doctor what he thinks. Hold on, John. Doctor.
Thanks, George. Hi, John. Yeah, I mean, there are still many people who don't even have access to email, let alone smartphones. So, you know, in as much as our government might make documentation compulsory, there would be a duty on them to make it compulsory in many forms such that it can be accessed. I'm not really going to comment any further on the concept of vaccine passports per se. There are pros and cons of them. It's quite clear that there is significant mistrust of what should be a very straightforward technology and medicine. I mean, if you don't get your children vaccinated, and there are some parents who really don't want to, it has been made some time ago a question of whether you are causing deliberate harm to your children. You know, it's arguable that you're imposing your beliefs on them and affecting their health. So these are questions which are not new, and I'm certainly not an anti-vaxxer. I'm very much in favor of vaccines. I've had loads. My children have had their normal vaccinations, and vaccination is a technology which is one of the few, almost unalloyed stories of success of the medical profession. But, because there is this mistrust raised by the whole handling of the pandemic, the massive levels of corruption we've seen from our government, the distrust in our ruling class, the antithesis between this incredibly wealthy bubble in Westminster and vast swathes of the country which are deindustrialized, going through poverty, the most marginalized sections of the community who are faring worse from coronavirus, have least trust in the government and in business, and therefore do not trust. I think it's a sad irony that they will be least likely to have the vaccine. But I personally am not in favour of absolutely coercing them and forcing them to do so by saying you will experience further social ostracification. I mean, I do think it's a problem that really wouldn't exist were there not this antipathy between the government and the populace. And I do think this is a misguided instance of being against the rollout of a perfectly good technology because of the system which is offering it to us. So I understand where people are coming from, but overall, the vaccines are very safe. They offer a way forward. It's like a get out of jail card free. I mean, but Boris Johnson, the Tory government, are riding on a wave of enthusiasm for the fact that we're going to be moving through this because of vaccination, when really, they should be in the dock of a court for all of the mismanagement and corruption that they have, really perpetrated against the British people throughout this pandemic. George.
John, thank you very much. By the way, Doctor, there's been a massive swing on the poll. These things happen, of course. Should vaccine passports be mandatory? A, yes, 46%. Up 24, no 34%, down 22, or only for travel, 20%, down 2. 2,290 people have voted. Thank you, as always, Doctor, for helping us through yet another week in the great coronavirus saga. Let me take a 60-second break. Why don't you?
Radio Sputnik.
Call me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum. Let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on.
But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and the people who work there? Have you looked at the global
I know nothing about them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But I'm not interested.
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring. Just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Should vaccine passports be made mandatory? The poll is going absolutely mad. So if you want to affect the result, you better get on either my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, or here on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Guy is in Stoke with a very sensitive topic. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, good evening, George.
Good evening to you. Nice to hear from you again.
Yeah. It's Miss Akuri.
Yes.
She's a model, she's a pole dancer, and she's an IT consultant. But she definitely needs therapy because apparently she fell in love with Boris Johnson. So I don't know about the mental.
Quite a few.
There.
Quite a few of them have. He must have something, Guy.
Well, I tell you what she got, George. She got £125,000 worth of taxpayers' money.
Maybe that's what it was.
Which is what maybe she's a lot smarter than I thought. The point of the call is, why the hell isn't the BBC and the other major news channels in this country reporting this story? Before I've been on the phone, I've Googled it. I've looked on the online channels of those news companies, and there's not one word about it. Now, I ain't interested in Johnson or Akuri. I'm interested in taxpayers' money. And surely I'm not the only person in this country who thinks that he used taxpayers' money to get sexual favours from that woman.
Well, part of the problem will be how to prove that. And if one were to be sued by Boris Johnson on that, one would have to prove it. And that is perhaps a formidable reason why only the Mirror went with the story today. As I understand it, Boris Johnson is denying these allegations, and it's worth making the point, Guy. So did Jennifer Akuri until today deny it. She denied that she had a sexual relationship with Boris Johnson, but she has changed her tune today. Boris Bonks Blonde would be the least shocking story, or least surprising one at least, of the year or any year. We know that he is a wretched, low-life cheater and liar, deceiver and adulterer and fornicator and fatherer of children, even of married women, leaving the married woman and her husband to bring up the child, the poor husband imagining that the child was his. There's nothing that Boris Johnson has not done. He's a low life, high-born, highfalutin, low life. That we know. And that isn't going to bring him down. But if it were to be established that the six-figure sum of taxpayers' money that was given to Jennifer Akuri was not given for the purposes that were officially on the papers, if the use of that money was not as it was intended to be, if her presence on all these trade missions and so on had more to do with her availability to him in the evening time than any genuine trade purpose, then Boris Johnson would be in very, very serious trouble. In other words, it won't be the sex that gets him, Guy. It will be, if anything does, the corruption angle of that story, if true. Guy, thanks for the call. Malcolm in Glasgow. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Quick follow-up, George. I spoke to you earlier about a story about the Western Isles.
Yes.
It actually appeared on Craig Murray's blog, which has subsequently been taken down. And I'll actually say there was a case in Auburn, and the guy was cleared of all charges. So I'm sure I can say there was Professor Woolhouse that went there with his wife. It was Isle of Lismore, and the police arrived on the island to persecute this old man against somebody who was a Scottish advisor advising and doing the wrong thing against his own advice. I'm scared to even talk about this in Scotland, George.
Yeah, well, we have reached that situation. That's true.
George, but before you take over, which I'm delighted to hear what you're going to say, is when it gets to a stage where, George, say we're 50-50. We had a call in 2014. Say we're 51-49. To get you into the stage where you're getting threatened to your life, to get me to get criticised from posting a positive UK thing on my Facebook, do these guys not have a life? Get on with things. Get over the pandemic and move on. I mean, we do 70% of our trade with England. For God's sake, get a life.
Well, Malcolm, that's very much my point of view. But roughly, the country is divided down the middle. Now, I want to say, this is a controversial point, that you cannot split up a country on 50-50, 51-49. You can't do that. Because actually, the principal consequence of the breaking up of Britain, or secondary consequence rather, would be the breaking up of Scotland. Because if you look at the political map of Scotland, support for separatism is confined to an exceedingly tiny, geographically speaking, exceedingly tiny part of the country. The vast expanses of the north, of the islands, of the south, where I live, are completely against separatism. And so it's not a realistic proposition, but the British government better get busy in establishing clarity on what circumstances and by what mechanism any part of the United Kingdom could secede from the Union. It simply won't be acceptable on a 75% turnout secession to win by 50.1 to 49.9. That's ridiculous and could only be a recipe for trouble, maybe even serious, real trouble. Malcolm, God bless you. John is in Dorset. Go ahead, John.
Hello, George. Hello, good evening.
Hi.
I just want to be slightly controversial and point out that I think it's wrong to give preferential treatment to religion. All religion, any religion, no matter what they do. It puzzles me how they get. They seem to be always near the seat of power. If they're not in the seat of power, then they're close by. We've got them in the House of Lords. We've got archbishops that have got absolutely nothing to do with politics, influencing law. Anyway, to get to my point, this week a school teacher showed a cartoon. Now, don't cut me off yet. I'm not going to say anything.
I'm not going to cut you off. No, I'm not going to cut you off. It's a very important subject.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. Now, the fact is that he was allegedly threatened with death. The school that he was teaching at is 85% Muslim, I understand. I don't know. I'm only just going on what I've read in the newspapers. And they're allowed to threaten somebody with ending his life. Now, I tried to get on another.
Can you tell me something? Just tell me something before you go on. Where was that death threat? From whom and by which means?
It was supposed to have been from parents that were standing at the school gates or representing those parents that are standing at the school gates.
You see,
I don't know exactly.
I'm sympathetic to the general point I suspect that you are going to make, but we have, but we do have to be exact. I myself have not seen a death threat. But, of course, in France,
well, let me just,
in France, George, there wasn't just a death... Hold on. In France, there wasn't just a death threat. The teacher was beheaded. So this is a matter of the gravest significance and importance. Go on, John.
Absolutely. No, that was what I was just about to allude to, was the fact that I tried to get onto an inferior radio station. And the bloke cut me off because he didn't allow me to finish, because he said, because I must admit, I did use colourful language when I compared religion to the Cray twins. And I must agree, maybe that is a bit strong, but I don't think it's as strong as sending out death threat to people. And the fact is,
if death threats were sent out, it seems that neither of us have actually seen a death threat.
No, well, let me tell you something, George, if I may.
Yeah.
You usually get the message with any religion I've ever read about or heard about is that be good and kind or else. Now, that is a bit that worries me about all religion, is that last two words, or else.
I'm cutting you short, not at all because of the subject matter, but because of the hour, John. We're only 6 minutes away from the end of the show. and I need to respond to this issue. First of all, I am a religious believer. My children go to a Roman Catholic school because I want them to be brought up in that religious ethos. That's my right. They are my children, not yours or anyone else's. And I have every right to send them to a religious school, and I'm very glad that I do. So I believe in an atmosphere of godliness because I believe in God, and I believe in the message of Jesus that we should love one another, we should love our neighbors, we should do good, or else. Yes, there you go, I've admitted it. I do believe that there is a judgment day, and on that judgment day, those that have done evil will be somehow punished. I don't know the details. I haven't got there yet. But I do believe that I'm entitled to have my children so educated. The Muslim parents in Batley, a town I know well, are equally entitled to send their children to religious schools. The problem is this particular school is not a religious school. Now, for Muslims, depictions of the Prophet Muhammad are forbidden. But this is not a Muslim country, and so you cannot forbid it. You can say that it's very unwise to do it, and I do say it was very unwise of this teacher to do it. He or she must have known what the response would be. But now that it has happened, the life of the teacher must be preserved and protected. We cannot possibly allow any person or group of persons to threaten death, speak as someone who was threatened with death just last weekend, or worse, to actually attempt to bring about the death of someone who has offended others. So this is not a Muslim country. If you absolutely want a guarantee that no one will ever, by any means or other, depict the Prophet Muhammad, then you better go and live in a Muslim country. You cannot insist upon that in Britain. At the same time, we have the right to publish pictures of the Muslim Prophet. We have that right. But because we have that right doesn't mean we need to exercise it. One has to weigh the consequences in terms of social peace and so on if one exercises one's right. But it was exercised by that teacher. And the absolute priority now is to protect the life of the teacher. John, I'm sure we'll come back to this subject and give it longer, and you'll be welcome to contribute, I promise you. Last call, I suspect, from Douglas in Glasgow. Go ahead, Douglas.
Hi, George. Just regarding one of your calls earlier about the human rights in China.
Oh, yeah.
I've got no axe to grind with China. I think what they've done for their people economically is amazing. But just regarding some of the historical things that have happened in China, and knowing that they are relatively authoritarian regime, how can you just totally discount there being any truth in the accusations of what's going on just now?
For two reasons, Douglas. First of all, I know the truth. And secondly, I look at the people that are making the allegations, and I have no compunction at all in dismissing them. First, because I know the truth, and second, because I know the people making the accusations are liars. That's why I do it, Douglas.
I'm only asking how you know the truth then.
How I know the truth is I've studied the matter intensively. Intensively. The source of these bogus, fake allegations about Uyghurs are the very sources that can be relied upon to bring you the fake news on any subject you like. What is it, Crimea? What is it, the Ukraine? What is it, Iraq? What is it, Libya? What is it, Syria? Any time you need it, these same people will come up with these stories. So It is absolutely untrue. It's the opposite of the truth. The Uyghurs in China are flourishing. Their population is flourishing, their economy is flourishing, their cultural life is flourishing, their religious life is flourishing. There are more mosques in Xinjiang province, more mosques in one province in China, Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs live, than there are in the entirety of the United States of America. In fact, only Saudi Arabia has more mosques per Muslim than the Xinjiang province in China does. It is a bright, shining lie, Douglas. I know that, and I know the people who are telling you otherwise are liars. So, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Douglas, don't get fooled again. They fooled you over Iraq. They fooled you over Syria. They fooled you over Libya. They fooled you over war after war after war. For goodness sake, don't fall for it all over again. That's a sign of madness. It's been marvelous for me. Hope it was for you.